some dark harbor where the sun don't ever shine, than to see you with another when you promise to be mine. Well, I'd rather be sailor and sail out.
It's August 12th. A good Thursday morning to you. Ryan Jesperson here. It is Real Talk presented by our friends at Bitcoin. Well, you know by now that they're the only publicly traded Bitcoin ATM company in the world. They're the first. There may be others that come, I don't know, but Bitcoin Well is the one that is blazing the trail. It was a huge day for them a couple of Fridays ago. A shout out to them from our team as they continue to make it easier and easier to understand and access cryptocurrency, in particular Bitcoin. You can find more about what they're doing under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Busy show in store in a few minutes. We'll call it between 5 and 10 from now. Alberta's former Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. James Talbot, will join us again. He was on the show back in April, you'll remember. We were picking his brain on the role of a Chief Medical Officer of Health, what the job entails, and how you can tell if a CMOH, as they say, is doing a good job, whether or not they're representing their mandate properly, whether or not they should be, keeping their job. And you'll remember Dr. Talbot came at us with reason. And he said, based on my experience, here's what you need to consider. He didn't get caught up in the emotion. He didn't get caught up in the fervor around people calling for the resignation of Dr. Deena Hinshaw. This was back in April when there were cases rising in unknown communities across the province of Alberta. Communities that were known to the Chief Medical Officer of Health, of course, communities and the scenario that was well known, of course, to the provincial government and the Ministry of Health, but not to the general public. And people were upset. People were saying that the government was maybe acting to protect a corporation, or maybe profits were coming ahead of people. A lot of people were really ticked off. And Dr. Talbot came on and he chatted with us. We're going to actually replay a little bit of that interview for you in just a second. Well, the interesting development here is that as Alberta has taken steps outpacing, you might say, leading, some might say, the rest of the country in the exit out of COVID-19 restrictions, protocols. You're seeing mass protests, members of the public daily in cities like Calgary and Edmonton and Red Deer, protesting at the legislature, at the McDougall Center, at houses of influence. I know a ton of parents are really concerned about what's coming up in September. A lot of you are having to make decisions right now to your schools or to your school boards about whether or not your kids are going to be in the classroom or whether or not they'll be learning from home. And you're looking around and none of the kids are vaccinated, and you're seeing that there were 500 new cases yesterday, and you're going, hang on a second. There were more new cases yesterday than this time last year. This doesn't make sense. Now, we're not here to fan the flames and to try to get everybody all worried more than they need to be, but I think it's safe to suggest that there are big questions around whether or not Dr. Deena Hinshaw is doing her job properly. Now people will come at me, as they have on social media for the past number of days, and said, a fired radio host is masquerading as an immunologist. A talk host must know more than the Chief Medical Officer of Health. I'm just calling him how I see him. I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing that there are a lot of people that have very real questions about who's making the decisions at the Alberta legislature and why those decisions are being made. Now, there's some discussion around that, the idea that Dr. Deena Hinshaw is leading a charge that we will soon see from other provinces and territories, that there's science behind the decisions to stop contact tracing and to stop requiring isolation for people who have positive COVID tests, and to stop tracking cases and announcing those numbers to the general public. Other people, I don't think, are so sure. And so I'm grateful that Dr. Talbot's agreed to join us. If I know him, and I've interviewed him several times, I know that he's going to tell us what he thinks. I'll warn you, that he's probably going to keep it classy, too, which I know will be somewhat disappointing for people that are expecting him to walk in and pull the pin and just throw a hand grenade right out of the gates. I don't think that's going to happen. But Dr. Talbot did sign his name to a letter to the Prime Minister. It's the one that we chatted about just the other day. An open letter, an urgent appeal for direct Alberta school board funding to mitigate risks of the Delta variant. And we talked yesterday to a University of Calgary political scientist, Dr. Lisa Young. She and I both kind of snickered at the letter because it's a powerful piece of politicking, in the sense that the members of the general public can see that reputable physicians like Taysin Latta and Joe Vipond and others have signed their name. Hakik Virani, a well-known public health practitioner and associate clinical professor out of Edmonton. Dr. Talbot, former chief medical officer of health. Carla Peck, Dr. Peck, she's been on the show before, a professor. You remember her? Her big thing is curriculum. She's been keeping an eye on that and combing through these curriculum drafts with a fine-tooth comb, making them understandable and accessible to members of the general public like you and me. There's some supercharged names on the list. In other words, with some of these names comes scrutiny and also a bit of a heavy-hitting type potential. Some union leaders like Gil McGowan from the Alberta Federation of Labor and Heather Smith from the United Nurses of Alberta and Guy Smith from AUPE, the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. The CUPE rep is on there as well. And there's a whole bunch. Mike Parker, who's the president of the Health Sciences Association of Alberta. These are folks in formidable roles. When we saw Dr. Talbot's name on the list, I went, I wonder if he's changed his tune a little bit. Now, the letter doesn't call for the chief medical officer of health to resign or anything like that. In fact, it's asking the prime minister to essentially swoop in and kind of take over, or at least direct or dictate where the funding for education is going to go. People are saying, given the track record of the Alberta government in failing to pass along federal funding, leaving hundreds of millions of dollars on the table, we implore the feds to directly fund Alberta school boards to help make classrooms safer. I'm curious to ask Dr. Talbot why he wanted to get into the mix on this one and what it implies. Of course, this is never going to happen. I mean, unless Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wants to absolutely, unequivocally declare war, which perhaps he would want to do, but I suspect that he has other battles on other fronts that he wants to fight. I'm looking forward to the conversation with Dr. Talbot. Coming up a little bit later on in the show, we're going to find out why Metis settlements in Alberta are suing the government. What's this lawsuit all about? A release that states, quote, a settler government is imposing its views on Indigenous peoples. That doesn't sound like reconciliation. Sounds a little tone deaf for the times. We'll talk to Herb Lehr from the Metis Settlements General Council. And then a little later on in the program, you've probably, if you're paying attention to international news, if you say the two Michaels anywhere in Canada, everybody pretty much knows what you're talking about, right? Kovrig and Spavor, they've been detained in China. This is all part of that Meng Wanzhou controversy, the Huawei executive that the Canadian authorities detained on behalf of the Americans. The Americans keeping their hands clean through all of this, but it's had big consequences for Canada, or at least for these two gentlemen. We've also got a third Canadian, Robert Schellenberg. Everybody's talking about him because a conviction on a drug trafficking sentence means that his death sentence, his appeal to that has been denied. He appealed a sentence for incarceration, was subsequently sentenced to death, and now that's been upheld. We'll talk to Gordon Houlden, who's the director emeritus of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. That's coming up in, we'll call it about an hour from now. Find out what's going on here. A lot of people are being pretty critical of the federal government right now, saying, what are you going to do about this? I saw some people yesterday calling for sanctions. They want to see Canada sanction China. And I know some of you will scoff and say, really? It's like the ant sanctioning the elephant. I don't know about that. Others of you are going to say, what? So we just sit and take it? So we just let China bully us around? Let China kick us in the teeth and get away with it? We'll find out from Gordon Houlden what he thinks is the appropriate response here from Canada. What can Canada control, and what role, if any, should the United States play in all of this? Based on that Huawei executive and that whole dust-up that essentially hurt the American ally, Canada, more than anybody. And then in about an hour and a half from now, a Hall of Famer an officer of the Order of Canada, an 8-time Juno Award winner, Tom Cochrane, will join us live on the show, Sarah Hoyles. Tom Cochrane.
Tom Cochrane.
He of Mad, Mad World. He of Life is a Highway. I've seen already some real talkers on Twitter when you made the announcement. They're already starting to submit their votes for, not technically, I guess we could put up a poll on the greatest Tom Cochrane tune of all time. Maybe you could do that.
Toughie.
Okay. In your spare time. But I've seen some real talkers chiming in and talking about, some of the favorite Tom Cochrane moments, Tom Cochrane tunes. For a lot of Canadians, he's been a huge part of their own musical journey. I mean, the guy's been playing music for like 40 years. Pretty unbelievable.
I mean, off the air, you and I had talked about, legendary Canadian musicians, and I was like, you've got Gord Downie, the Trage, and you've got Tom Cochrane right up there.
Yeah.
He
would be, you wonder if he might be on the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock legends. I realize I'm opening up a huge can here.
I wouldn't put it on a mountain.
You know what we should do is we should ask him who would be on the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock musicians. Sam, I can tell you're deep in thought. I mean, this is putting you on the spot.
On the spot.
Brian Adams has to, because are we going by
4?
Are we going? Yeah, Mount Rushmore. That's the challenge. You only get 4.
Celine.
No, but here's what I'm saying: Canadian rock legends. So Celine Dion's out.
Come on, she can rock.
Oh, come on, Hoyles. Celine Dion, no disrespect to Celine Dion. She's made $30 billion or whatever she's done. Celine's awesome. She's not a Canadian rock legend. Brian Adams has to be on just based on album sales prominence, doesn't he? Gord Downie has to be on because the entire country mourned his passing, indicating how Canada feels about him.
Yeah, I'm gonna submit Neil Young.
Yes.
And
what about Burton Cummings?
Maybe Burton Cummings. I'm thinking Katie Lang.
On the rock?
I don't know.
Maybe not a rock.
What about Nickelback? I'm just joking.
Maybe you shouldn't be. No, but actually though,
they're not legit.
Hoyle, come on. The sales numbers don't lie, right?
Not
Numbers.
Legit.
How can they're not legit? Because you don't prefer them? Is that why they're not legit? Tom Cochrane's like, I'm not walking into this conversation. You guys just ripping. We're just ripping people. Just ripping. But Nickelback might have to. I mean, there's. What are we going to do here? Because, we haven't even mentioned. What about all the band? There's kind of like the secondary. What's the tourist stand before Mount Rushmore? We could talk about who would be there. I was like, what about 5440? But now I'm starting to get into the kind of, you know what I mean? We're getting out of Rushmore territory here.
Yeah, the other name I was going to put forward, and I mean, this just fits me right in the feels because this is a personal favorite, Alanis Morissette.
You know what? Absolutely.
Jagged Little Pill might be one of my all-time favorites.
Someone put Rush. Haas just suggested Rush.
Geddy Lee?
I mean, I'm not a fan because they're very divisive. But
what do you mean they're very divisive? You mean their style of music?
Yeah, a lot of people are like,
okay, got it. Yeah,
don't like them sometimes.
Okay.
And if we're picking individuals, I wouldn't say Geddy Lee. I'd say Neil Peart. Or Neil Peart, pardon me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. AB is wondering, why do people hate on Nickelback? I don't get it. Others are saying Big Sugar. Here's the thing. With respect to bands like Big Sugar, love Big Sugar. I've had an opportunity to hang out and crack a couple cold ones with Big Sugar, but not on the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock musicians.
They're the ones that are in the before the Rushmore, right?
Yeah. Nick is saying this needs to be a Twitter poll. I think you're right. The lousy part about the Twitter polls is that they only give us 4 options. I'd love to put 15 bands or 15 front persons, 15 performers on there and say who would be your top 4, and then we could just let the internet decide, which would be great. Patrick is saying the band, Robbie Robertson, easily had the biggest influence on rock, a bigger influence than any other. Blind Melon chiming in saying, how do you have a Mount Rushmore without Rush? Fair enough. They put the Rush in. Someone's saying the Philosopher Kings. Are they Canadian?
Yes, they are.
I didn't know the Philosopher Kings were Canadian. Are they now? I'm having a return. Are they from Winnipeg? Maybe, or am I thinking of someone else?
I'd have to look it up.
Who knows? Here's the thing: if you don't know whether or not they're Canadian, they're not on the Mount Rushmore. So Mark B in SLC, beautiful Salt Lake City, Utah. He says, and people are saying people are naming bands. You can't name bands.
That's the rule now?
Well,
You're making
it's
the rule?
It's the Mount Rushmore. So you can't have like 5 busts over here and then 6 busts. So you're like, we got the hip over here and we've got, you can't do that. You have to pick the musician. This is the thing. We're not talking about Red Rider. We're talking about Tom Cochrane, right? So I'm thinking you've got Alanis Morissette, Gord Downie. We're going to say Tom Cochrane because he's on the show. And because 8 Junos, 40 years, Officer of the Order of Canada. That's another thing too, right? Like album sales is one thing. Endearing yourself to Canadians, being part of Canadian culture is another. When your music is a soundtrack of a lot of people's summers or a lot of people's special memories, Cochrane's got him there. But then when the Governor General has pinned you and has appointed you, you've been named an Officer of the Order of Canada. That's a whole other level. So he's got to be right up there on that. Tim with a vote for Alan Doyle, who is just a delightful beauty. I'm gonna say that, I mean, Chad Kroeger from Nickelback may belong on the Mount Rushmore.
See, and this is where I'm going to differ, and I'm going to say if we got to fill that last slot, it's got to be Neil Young.
Well, yeah, how do you leave Neil Young off? Oh, my, I mean, this exercise is just proving to be a fool's errand. I think what we've established is that the list of all-time legendary Canadian rockers is formidable. I've used the word formidable twice in 15 minutes. I better pick up a thesaurus. That's what I think needs to happen today.
I think it just shows just how deep the bench is when we look at like the roster of amazing Canadian rock and rollers.
Yeah. Yeah. James says if Rush is not in the poll, then they're going to riot. Linda Ray is calling for April Wine. See, here's the thing. Now I think we're getting into, with April Wine, I'm thinking these are great summer rock festival bands, but we're getting outside of the conversation on the Mount Rushmore. The Mount Rushmore has got to be the definitive top. These are the pillars of Canadian rock history. A vote for Chilliwack. Bare Naked Ladies. Did I even finish? I didn't even finish reading Mark B. and SLC's comment. He's like, you dropped my name. You didn't even say what I had to say. But the Hip. I jumped in when he said the Hip, and I remind. So we'll say Gord Downie with respect to the rest of the band. So he'd go for Gord Downie, Bryan Adams, and then he's got Bare Naked Ladies. So I don't know who you go with there. Maybe Stephen Page, even though I know he's kind of on the outs with the band. And Stephen Page is not on the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock, but the Bare Naked Ladies are a legendary band for sure. And then Rush, I don't know who you go with there. There might be some. I think you got to go Geddy Lee. I mean, he's kind of the face of the band, isn't he? Really? I mean, the front. He's the front.
And the voice.
When you think of but Rush has its own. It's like talking to Star Trek fans, or
Deadheads,
or vegans. There's just like a whole other. It's like they're talking a whole other language. Went to a Rush show once, had a great time, but I was like, I don't really know what's going on. I'm not on this level of fandom. You know what I'm saying?
See, and I've seen Rush too, and I'm not a huge Rush fan, but like my whole takeaway from the Rush show is just like, there's only 3 of them. There's so much going on, and there's only 3 guys on stage.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, it's. I'm not comparing the style of music at all. But with regards to another great word here, the cacophony that you can experience at a Rush show, it's kind of like being at a Dave Matthews show or like a Fish show where there's just a lot of stuff going on. Lot of stuff going on. And then viewers, audience members like Cindy are chiming in and, White Hot and Lunatic Fringe. Some great references here. I'm seeing more references for Randy Bachman. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. All right, you can keep the votes coming. We're looking forward to that. Just a reminder, why we're Rain Maida, a vote for Rain Maida. Hey?
Our Lady Peace, yeah.
Yeah. And he and his beautiful
Chantal
partner in life, Chantal Kreviasek, if you actually look and do like a really deep dive, and I appreciate this from Troy as well, who's wondering where do the Sheepdogs fit. As far as I'm concerned, Sheepdogs should be on the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock, but I don't know if they're there yet. First unsigned or independent band ever to be on the cover of Rolling Stone. That's a thing. That was just that anniversary, 10-year anniversary just passed, which was pretty cool. But Alex, hey, first name only. And if you can do first name only, like Alex has done here, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. He says Neil, Joni. But you almost need to do like a folk. If you were going to do like a folk or folk roots Mount Rushmore, that's where then you could be talking. Because I've seen some votes for Jan Arden in here. Obviously, there's some great Canadian crooners.
We're seeing Gordon Lightfoot come up a lot. That would
lot
go
of
in
Gordon
the folks
Lightfoot.
route. Yeah.
So Alex goes Neil, Joni, Gord, and Leonard. He did say Leonard Cohen, but I'm going to cut it off. Brenda voting for Corey Hart. Maybe we should just do this for the next hour and a half. This is actually a lot of fun. This feels, Sam, like our New Year's Eve morning show. You remember that where we just hung out and hung out, got a little bit tipsy, and just interacted with our Patreon supporters. That was a lot of fun. But the point I was going to make is Rain Maida, Chantal Kreviasik. I was talking to somebody, I don't know, 6 months ago or something that knows them personally. They're like, their musical careers are accomplished and they've done a lot of really cool stuff. They're like, but until you talk to them and realize how many projects they've influenced or had their hands in, you really have no idea. There's so many musicians doing so many things behind the scenes to lift up other musicians as well. Pretty interesting. And now votes continue to come in. I don't know if some of you are trolling us now. Although Daniel makes a great point in arguing for the sheepdogs to be included in the conversation. He says the sheepdogs can curl. How many bands do that? Probably more than we think, actually.
Yeah, true story.
Yeah.
I guarantee the hip can definitely curl.
Is this true? Is this from Matt? Is this true? Is Our Lady Peace has a new single? Is this true? Is it called Stop Making Stupid People Famous? Is that really that with respect to Ayla Brooke and the Soundmen, this might have to be our new theme song. We'll find out. You can let us know. And then, of course, we haven't even looked at this. Brenda reminding us we're 10 minutes into this conversation. Nobody's even mentioned Blue Rodeo to this point.
Nope.
But rock. We've been talking about rock legends. Like, it's sort of the same argument that we've been making for more of.
They're in that
like folk. They're like that alt country
area.
folk roots sort of area.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Blue Rodeo. 5 Days in July is like my summer childhood.
It's one of
in
the greatest
mountains.
albums of all
It
time.
is. I know.
Fact check. Stop Making Stupid People Famous features Pussy Riot, which is the amazing Russian band.
They were the ones that got all arrested and
by Putin. Yeah, big time. And it's brand new with Our Lady Peace featuring Pussy Riot, released 2021.
Wow.
Okay,
I have
gotta
not
get
heard
into
it.
that.
Need to listen to it.
Troy pointing out that the hip curled in the film Men with Brooms.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like this is a day. This is not cool for me to say this because we don't intend to actually do it. But this would be a day where we should be doling out Real Talk mugs, our ceramic diner mugs, to everybody making great points this morning. That's why the Real Talk tailgate party is going to be so much fun when it actually happens. You get a mug, and you get a mug, and you get a mug. It's going to be a great time. I'm starting to see as soon as a band gets mentioned, then more and more people start chiming in. You know, Kim Mitchell, Greg is demanding some respect for he of. Or is everyone going to roll their eyes if I say patio lanterns? I bet you like the real Kim Mitchell fans are probably like, dude, that's, some musicians like Bobby McFerrin, for example, with Don't Worry, Be Happy. People are like, you realize that Bobby McFerrin's like a phenomenal jazz musician. And he did more than Don't Worry, Be Happy, but he's known for that one song. I wonder if Kim Mitchell was... Kaylin is watching in from Vancouver, says, as a Gen Z, most of this is way over my head, but Blue Rodeo is a big part of her childhood. Marie coming in late for a vote for Colin James, a vote for Avril Lavigne. Patrick with Trooper. You can probably tell that we're waiting right now on Dr. James Talbot,
Fred
and he's
Penner.
not yet here yet. Fred Penner would be on the Mount Rushmore of Canadian good guys.
And Raffi.
Yeah. Raffi's got some sort of political activism.
Oh,
in it. If
yeah.
you follow Raffi on Twitter now, he doesn't mess around. Yeah. I'm like, I had to check it at first. When I first was on social media, I'm like, is this the same Raffi? Is this the same guy? Just making sure. All right, we got a lot that we're going to be paying attention to, keeping an eye on. This from Tracy, who says, can we now all agree that as you've been listing off so many names here that Canada has some pretty awesome music, some pretty great musicians? I agree. Isn't that the truth? I love this from Shirley, who says, let's designate one mountain in the Rockies. The Rockies. I see what you did there, Shirley. She says we could just rename it every few years. Mount Young, Mount Cohen, Mount Trooper. I'd go hike and party on Mount Trooper.
Do you think the vibe of the mountain would change every time it's renamed?
It probably would.
Yeah.
Like if in Mount Cohen, people would be sort of like, hallelujah.
You'd go sit under a tree
and flowers, and you're hiking up, and the eagle is soaring overhead, hallelujah. And then and then everyone can hear that opening guitar from Patio Lanterns, when it's Mount Mitchell. I think the thing about renaming it every few years is that the general public perceives the renaming to be a stripping of honor. Unless it's very clear that the mountain was going to be renamed the entire time anyway. You know what I mean?
What if they did it like a sports trophy, like the Stanley Cup, where they add a name to it every year? And so, for this year, it is Mount Young.
Do you know what this sounds
but you can
like?
see the history of all the names behind it.
These are the types of conversations that happen about 8 beers in. And we're having it live right now at 8:55 a.m. Mountain Time on this Thursday, August 12th. Deadmau5? Deadmau5 is not Canadian. Are you guys messing with me?
No, Deadmau5 is very Canadian.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
Deadmau5 is Canadian?
One of my best friends is signed to his label and performs with them all the time.
Wow. Deadmau5 is
How
Canadian.
come people haven't said Biff Naked then?
Yeah, Biff Naked is super cool in real life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Biff Naked is a super, super cool human. Nick says it sounds like very important work is being done here. I'll tell you this. You find me another talk show that has the guts to talk about this on a Thursday morning. You won't find one. Dr. James Talbot, we're hoping will be able to join us. If not now, maybe he can join us tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. This is probably a pretty great opportunity for me to remind you what's going on right now with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. This is super exciting. If you want to follow along, just go to winspearcenter.com. You're going to find there how you can pick up your tickets to check out the return. This is super exciting. Symphony Under the Sky is back in Edmonton's Hawrelak Park. Bar none. Without a doubt, this is one of the coolest things that you can do in Alberta's capital city in the summer months. Imagine performances suitable for all audiences, date night, anniversary, time with friends, taking the kids out, why not? Classical gems, Hollywood hits. They've got 2 programs, amazing Hollywood hits, festival favorites. What a great introduction to symphony for somebody would love classical music, that loves getting outside, and what a great return to check out the ESO. This is the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra's this is their return to full performance. This is a huge deal. They haven't done so since March of 2020. They've been waiting a year and a half. And now your opportunity to check it out August 26th through September 5th. All the information you need at winspearcenter.com. It's Symphony Under the Sky at William Hawrelak Park. We also wanted to give a shout out to a viewer who chimed in right now. We got an email this morning from Karen, and Karen says she's living in the southern part of Alberta. She lives beautiful Lethbridge. A shout out to Lethbridge this morning. She says, of all the 16 Alberta communities that have a Friesen Brothers, we're not one of them. She says, so I was so excited when we as a family arrived in Drumheller and saw a Friesen Brothers store. She says, of course, being real talkers, we stopped in, we stocked up on their homemade Ivan's sausage, on pepperoni, beef jerky, and she says, of course, Jespo, the sourdough cinnamon buns. Congratulations, Karen. That's the best call you could possibly make. Can we go back and just take a look at how the Friesen Brothers in Drumheller has... Is that a T-Rex? It appears to me to be a T-Rex coming out of the side of the building. How cool is that? Friesen Brothers in 16 Alberta communities, including beautiful Drumheller. You can find out more at friesen.com. Received note, by the way, our Twitter poll wrapped up yesterday, and we had asked you, this was based on our interview with Alice Sparkly Cat, the, can I say, famed astrologer? She's certainly a notable astrologer. She's like of the new school of astrology, pushing out her horoscopes and other observations on Insta Story. I mean, these are ways that people are connecting with astrology these days. And we had asked you how you feel about it. Like, is it something that's part of your life? Do you take it seriously? Do you not? 835 votes on this unofficial poll. I don't know if you two read into the numbers. Do you read into if we get 800 respondents to something as opposed to 3,000 or 4,000? So we've had polls that people take a little bit more seriously and we'll get 3,500 or 4,000 people engaging. But still, 835, it's no joke. Of the 835 who responded, there was an interesting trend because we gave you 3 options. Absolutely, I buy in 100% for horoscopes. Sure, they can be fun. Or, oh, come on, no way. The cynics had it running away early. But by the end of the 24-hour period, which was just a short time ago, it just wrapped up about an hour ago, our poll, it was down to 50%. 50.4% of you voted, oh, come on, no way. Another 42.5% said, sure, they can be fun. And then 7% said, absolutely, I buy in 100%. So put it this way. This is an audience. This is a community. Divided. This is split. 50% of you say no way, and then the combination of people who buy in 100% or say, yeah, sure, they can be fun, equals 49.6%. This was a nail biter. This was right down the middle. If you missed our conversation with Alice Sparkly Cat, you can find it, of course, anywhere you download your podcast. Thanks to those of you that subscribe. And, of course, thanks to those of you as well that join us every morning on YouTube and subscribe there. You can smash the like button if you're enjoying what you're hearing here. It's a good time for us to remind you as well, our question of the week is always up for you at ryanjesperson.com. This week, we're asking you about the Olympic Games. Another Olympics have come and gone, this one in Tokyo. After a year-long delay, more than 11,000 athletes in 33 sports came together in this edition of our Get Real question of the week. We want to hear your take on the moments in this year's games, the relevance of the spectacle, and how you feel about some of the events. We have a few minutes before our next interview with Herb Lehr, and I'm wondering if this might be time to get into this. Now, typically, I think the beauty of the question of the week on Real Talk is that it's private. You don't have to discuss publicly how you feel about something. You can do it under the cover of anonymity and share your thoughts and your feelings. And some of these questions might make some of you uncomfortable. By design, that's the point. We want it to have a meaningful question of the week. I'm going to work my way through this with you right now. Did you pay attention to the games this year? You know what I'm going to go with? I didn't watch much, but I checked in on how it was going regularly. Not really, but I tuned in for the signature events. That's me. 100 meters, 200 meters, women's soccer, the semifinal game against the States, the gold medal game. When that men's decathlon was getting really interesting, watched that. Some great Canadian athletes. Watched a little bit of the skateboarding. Did you guys watch? Did you get into that at all? Some of the other events, surfing, golf.
Just bits of it. The skateboarding dominated by teenagers.
Yeah.
I kind of loved that. Like seeing literally 13-year-olds medaling at the Olympic Games. It was wild.
Where do you go from there in life after you have a gold medal at 13? Wasn't it like, didn't Shirley Temple win an Oscar when she was like 8 or something? Or am I thinking of somebody else? No, I'm not. It's not Shirley Temple. Or maybe it is.
Anna Paquin?
There were 2 really young. Anna Paquin one, was that for
the piano?
For the piano, yeah. Youngest Oscar winners. Like, what do you do if you win an Academy Award?
I feel like that kind of takes the pressure off, I think. Like, you're like, okay, I've accomplished something really great.
Yeah.
Now I can, what else do I want to do? I like that. Like, because I remember when I got out of journalism school, I went and worked at the CBC, and that was like the pinnacle. That was what I was thinking. That's what I wanted to do with my life. And then I got there and was like, oh, well, now what?
Yeah.
Well, now what do I really want to do?
What do you really want to do?
I want to work with Ryan Jesperson
Yes.
on Real Talk.
I'm thrilled that your dreams have come true. Shirley Temple won an honorary Oscar at age 6 in 1935. My son is 6. Wow. I'm going to let him know. Shirley Temple had an honorary Oscar. And by the time she died, perhaps her greatest achievement, I would say, is probably the most notable non-alcoholic beverage of all time named in her honor.
It is so good. I love a good Shirley Temple.
If my source is correct, and I'm citing the New York Post here, at 10 years old in 1974, based on her role as Addie Prey, a pint-sized con artist selling Bibles to unsuspecting widows during the Great Depression in the film Paper Moon. At 10 years of age, Tatum O'Neal became the youngest Academy Award-winning actor of all time, a Best Supporting Actress role in 1974. Very interesting. Patty Duke was 16. This is wild, hey? Anna Paquin, Best Supporting Actress, was 11. Yeah. I mean, I wonder, that'd be interesting. It would be interesting to talk to a child psychologist. I had a chance to talk to somebody yesterday who does a little bit of work with Macaulay Culkin. That would be another example. These child stars that are just under such intense pressure that whatever they do for the rest of their life, people are like, what are they doing now? Whatever happened to them? It's like, what do you mean what happened to them? The guy's probably worth $150 million trying to live a normal life. Back to the question of the week. Given the concerns in Tokyo at the time event, the number of cases that occurred as a direct result, should the Olympics have been held at all? How do you feel about this? I know, Hoyles, you the other day said that you felt like it was inappropriate, that even though there were no fans, you said you didn't love that the games, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that was the sense you gave us, that you felt that they should have been paused for another year. What was your sense on that?
I just think, that they should have been paused. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Olympics, period. So
yeah, okay.
you're not going to get somebody that's going to rah-rah about it.
I need to know my audience before I come to you on questions on the question of the week. Well, that's fine, though, because you got to, here, if I'm filling this out, you got to make sure you fill it out at some point today, too, so it kind of balances it out. Sam, what did you think? Did you think it was good that they went ahead with the games? They had been postponed already for a year.
Yeah, I'm torn on this. And I'm torn on this because I feel like the international community could have helped Japan be better ready for that. And sort of what I mean by that is Japan, unfortunately, because they're in the same situation as Canada, they don't manufacture vaccines. And they were super, 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 super low vaccination rates because it was just very hard for them as a country to procure them in advance of the games. And so it just, to me, because, I mean, I'm sort of on the other side from Sarah. It's just I naturally love the Olympics. When the Olympics are on, it's just... I love the fact that they're always on and there's always something to watch. And there's always a storyline that you've never kind of seen.
The two of you can coexist in the studio and get along despite different opinions. Spread the word about Real Talk. I'm going to go with, yes, the world needed a unifying event after 18 months of isolation and closed borders. I'm going to vote for that. Are the modern Olympics still important and relevant? I'm going to go, yes, the high level of competition creates the best, most thrilling sporting event in the world. It's fine that the Olympics have their detractors or their haters, but I think generally speaking, en masse, it's fair to say it's the biggest, with the exception of the World Cup. Obviously, football fans, soccer fans around the world might argue for the World Cup, but I think that the Olympics is still the biggest stage. Does Canada celebrating our accomplishments? See, here's where it gets into it. These are the questions. I'm really looking forward to this. Now, we should let our Real Talkers know that we are taking next week off, and so these results will be announced the week following. Does Canada celebrating our accomplishments in the Olympic Games distract from our ongoing national conversation about violence against Indigenous communities and the legacy of residential schools? Does celebrating accomplishments in the Olympics distract from that conversation? We've given you some interesting options on this. I'm hoping that 500 or 600 of you today are inspired to go in and answer these questions based on us going through this right now. One of the options, yes, the Olympics celebrate national pride that glosses over and shifts our focus. Yes, there are so few Indigenous athletes. The population is essentially invisible during the games. No, I think the athletes will use platforms to maintain focus on the legacy of residential schools. That's an interesting option. I'm not sure if I would say en masse. I think Olympic athletes are going to be talking about residential schools. You look at some. I mean, arguably our greatest Olympian of all time, Clara Hughes, on this show. I mean, she's been incredible. If you're on Instagram, follow Clara Hughes today. If you don't already, I am so impressed by her. I had no idea about Clara Hughes. I knew that she was a champion cyclist. I knew that she was a phenomenal speed skater. I had really no idea about her sense of, and I say this as a compliment, social justice. The other option, no, we can be proud of our athletes and still hold difficult conversations about our nation's history. That's the one I'm going to vote for. And then the other one, these conversations don't have a place in sports. I don't believe that. It's like Andrew Ference said to us, the Stanley Cup champion, the former captain of the Edmonton Oilers when he was on this show. I said to him, how do you feel when people tell athletes to stay in their lane? And he kind of looked. He said, that's my lane. This is my lane. Just because I'm an athlete doesn't mean I can't have a strong opinion on something. Here's one. Here's a question. I'm really curious to see where Real Talkers are going to land. For the first time in Olympic history, transgender athletes were recognized in competition, albeit on a small scale. Transgender athletes are only going to be more commonplace in the future of sport. What are your feelings on the emergence of transgender and non-binary athletes competing in the Olympic Games? And this is where I think this poll is going to get very interesting. And so we give you several options. The team at Y Station's done a great job with this one. It's simple. You should be required to compete as the gender you were assigned at birth. It's simple. You should be required to compete as the gender you identified as during Olympic qualifiers. The debate is over, and the IOC and regulatory bodies for sports need to develop aligned policies to accommodate these athletes before qualifying for Paris 2024 begins. See, I agree that they need to develop aligned policies, and I agree it should be before the next Olympic Games, but I don't know that one opens with the debate is over. That's like you can say certain things, whether we're talking about vaccines or whether we're talking about social programs, things around supervised consumption or harm reduction. Once you start saying things like the science is settled or the debate is over, that steers me away from that option. Another one, I think a lot of people who want to ban transgender athletes from women's competition are conspicuously silent on other equity and equality issues in women's sports. That's an interesting option. Another one, transgender and non-binary athletes are a reality in the future of sports. It will change how we categorize athletes and organize their competitions. Another, I think it's a reality that an athlete would claim a false gender just to get an edge in competition. That blew you back in your chair, Hoyles.
That's like when people say that people that claim assault are just doing it for attention. That to me is like, that's garbage.
In other words, saying, some guy is going to identify as a woman so he can make the whatever team and come in and win a gold medal.
Yeah.
I will say that in one of the women's powerlifting events, this was the one that got that no thank you hashtag trending. You remember that? The American athlete, was it the British athlete? I think it was the American athlete that leaned in. There was a 9-second silence. A reporter said, today, history was made in your event. A transgender woman involved in the competition. I don't have the exact phrasing of the question in front of me, but basically said, how do you feel about it? And you had the gold, silver, and bronze medalists sitting there. 9 seconds of silence. And finally, the American leans in and lifts up her mask and says, no, thank you. Most people, I think most reasonable people, saw the no thank you as a no thank you to the question. Some people weaponized it. It was trending globally on Twitter. We were paying attention to it here in the studio off air. Some people took it as no thank you to the reality of that competitor in that sport that day. I don't think that's what the athlete meant by that. And then our final option here, I think it's ridiculous to think an athlete would go through everything a transgender person is subjected to in order to win a medal. So there's a whole bunch of options here, and I'm really curious to see where Real Talkers are going to land on this. I've gone through all of these options, and I've done it publicly, so I do feel compelled to commit to one on here. I'm going to say, because I'm turned off by the debate is over assertion. I'm turned off by that. I don't like the debate is over assertion, so I'm going to skip that. And for now, I'm going to go with, I think it is ridiculous to think an athlete would go through everything a transgender person is subjected to in order to win a medal. And I will say at least, let me say this. I don't know if this is going to be a popular statement. That doesn't matter. Not every statement needs to be made if you only think it's going to be popular. I'm going to say at the Olympic level, I don't think that's the case, but I do think there are people, there have been people, and there will be people that in order to prove a point, in order to, I think, almost weaponize the debate, I do think that there will be people, and I'm sure that there are instances already publicly of somebody mocking this entire thing. And in a sort of a publicity stunt kind of a way, trying to prove something. It's going to happen at some high school or something, or some junior college. It's going to happen where somebody's going to do something to try to prove a point, and it's going to become a national story that Tucker Carlson's going to talk about, and Bill O'Reilly's going to come out of hiding. Bill O'Reilly's still around, right? Does he do a podcast now or something after he got paid $60 million to leave Fox News for harassing and assaulting a bunch of people?
Yeah,
allegedly?
He loves the spotlight too much. I'm sure he's somewhere.
He's got to be like writing a book or something. There's no way Bill O'Reilly just goes away. But there will be something. I don't think, and we were talking to the team at Y Station saying we have to have a question in on that, because that's one of there were so many stories of what happened on the field of competition, so to speak, at the Olympics. And then there were so many stories. I mean, what about the shared gold medal? What about the shared gold medal in men's high jump, for example? That's another example. A lot of stories going on. What was Canada's biggest Olympic moment? Was it Penny Oleksiak becoming the most decorated Olympian in Canadian history at age 21? That's kind of like the Oscar thing. Although, you know what I love about Penny? I'll use first name, even though I don't know her personally. She's like, she tweets, like she just has this swagger. Did you see her tweet? After she officially became the most decorated Olympian in Canadian history at age 21, her tweet something along the lines, I can tell you, it's actually not that lonely at the top. I was like, atta girl. I love it. Andre DeGrasse winning gold in the men's 200. Was that Canada's biggest Olympic? I already know what I think it is. Damian Warner winning the men's decathlon. Arguably, I mean, they've been saying for years, the winner of the decathlon, a lot of people will say is the best athlete in the world. To have that as a Canadian is pretty special and pretty sweet. Here's my vote. Sorry to skew the poll. The Canadian national women's soccer team winning gold. That, for me, that's my Olympic moment. That's what I will remember, I think. I don't know about you. I don't know why I keep asking you. You don't give a shit.
No, I mean, I like to be aware of what's happening in the world, and I'm not going to say that I'm not aware of it. And I thought that was really, I mean, the women winning the gold for soccer. I mean, until DeGrasse won, all the gold medals were won by women. So
it was huge.
Yeah,
the Canadian women showed up in a big way. What was the biggest moment overall? We ask you. Simone Biles withdrawing from competition in order to care for her mental health. The two high jumpers out of Qatar and Italy agreeing to share the gold medal, which I'll be honest, drives me nuts.
Because you want them to be like, oh, we are competing.
It drives me, well, it just, I don't understand it. I have no problem admitting that. And I know that we had this conversation. We'll recreate this, I suppose, for Real Talkers. But both of you were saying to me, you're like, none of them could go any further. Like, what do you want them to do? They're both at they're both at that level, and neither of them can get to the next level. So what do you want them to do? And I guess, but there's got to be something.
There could have been like attempts. Like
there's
how many attempts?
There's got to be some sort of it, right? Because otherwise, what's like a shared gold medal? Wasn't it the same when Jamie Soleil and David Pelche got screwed over by the French judge in 2002, and then the Russians were awarded the gold medal? I'm remembering this correctly, right? And then Soleil and Pelche, when everything surfaced and came out and ultimately worked out in the wash, they were awarded the gold medals, but the Russians were not stripped. So there were two gold medal winners in the figure skating event that year at the Olympics, right? It just seems to me like there should only be one gold medal. That's the whole point. But again, this may surprise folks, not an Olympic athlete here. Elaine Thompson-Herah out of Jamaica successfully defending the women's 100 and 200 meter golds while breaking the 33-year-old 100-meter world record. That's pretty phenomenal. The Canadian national women's soccer team winning gold. Allison Felix becoming the most decorated U.S. track athlete in Olympic history. That was big, of course, surpassing Carl Lewis. And then we give you the option to say there wasn't one, the biggest moment. There wasn't one. I'm biased. I'm going to go Canadian national women's soccer team winning gold. And then we go on and we ask you a bunch of questions. I encourage you. I hope that this has inspired you and prompted you to answer our question of the week. It's a really great way for us to get a sense of where Real Talkers are at. And full disclosure, and of course I'm going to say what's probably obvious to you already. We're going to tap into your responses on some of those questions, in particular the one around non-binary and transgender athletes, and we're looking forward to future conversations on the show about that. I have no problem admitting that I'm a little bit nervous to have those conversations too, because I think that there are a lot of people that are compassionate, empathetic, open-minded, loving, reasonable people that are still a little bit twisted up on the idea around non-binary and transgender athletes in organized sport. And I think that for us to have courageous conversations about it, coming from a positive place, coming from a place where we make commitments to respect people in these conversations but allow people to say what they think, I hope is going to be a really productive exercise, because I don't see a lot of open-minded, productive conversation about that issue in mainstream discussion.
Well, I think we look at it as in sport, but I think just in general.
Yeah.
Getting the awareness and the understanding around transgender folks and what that is and how it operates, instead of, because, you know, we've all been socialized to think of the binary of
men and women.
And so then to put it through the lens of sport is like an added layer.
Because as they say on Ted Lasso, I can't remember the name of the character, but football is life. Sports is life. As is triathlon. And Edmonton, from August 20th through 22nd, is going to be hosting for the third time in its history. It's why they call it Canada's Triathlon City, the World Triathlon Championship Finals. It's coming up in just a couple of weeks. And so it's never too late or never too soon to get involved or to get your seats set up. In other words, if you're still considering participating, there's still an opportunity. There are some limited spots, but there's all kinds of cool ways to get involved. You can look here, for example, the elite classes, the U23s, the up-and-coming triathletes, the champions of tomorrow. Look at all these community events, opportunities to volunteer. And then here with spectators, this is great. The main event schedule, this website's really easy to navigate at edmonton.triathlon.org. You can see everything that's going on, including that urban cycling fondo that a bunch of people are talking about. A couple pals of mine are talking about riding in that. That's on the Sunday, August 22nd. All the details, again, for the World Triathlon Championship Finals at edmonton.triathlon.org. Also wanted to take an opportunity to remind you that our friends at Grand Dog Essentials Quality Raw Food are about so much more than just the quality raw food. They've got a team of nutritionists available to consult with you to find the solution that's best for your pup. They've got their supplements. They've got oils, whether it's joint health, muscle soreness, a little bit of gut rot that your pup's experiencing. These are the problems that they solve, Hoyles. You know, if you've experienced it on the human side, you know, it's no bueno. But I was checking out their Instagram yesterday, the team at Grand Dog. You know why? You know what prompted me to? Because they reached out to us, a little bouquet, if you will. The team at Grand Dog was on the road making their deliveries, right? They deliver right to your door. Calgary, Edmonton, Central Alberta. They're streaming with the Mixler audio app on the dashboard of their delivery truck, Real Talk, live, on the road. I loved it. But they made it so I'm poking around their Instagram, and I realized they've got a whole bunch of informative stuff on bones, and when it's okay to give your dog a bone, whether or not it should be a raw bone or a cooked bone. The answer is raw. Never give your dog a cooked bone. All the details at granddog.ca. The promo code REALTALK gets you 10% off your first time order. All right, let's find out why Métis settlements are suing, essentially, the government. This is a big deal, a lawsuit that implies that Bill 57, and don't worry, we'll get you up to speed on it, is a settler government imposing its views on Indigenous peoples. Herb Lehr is with the Métis Settlements General Counsel, kind enough to join us this morning. Herb, welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for making time for us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our conversation.
Herb, I know a lot of people are going to be really interested in this, but I guarantee some folks are going to appreciate a quick backgrounder to get us up to speed on what we're talking about here. What's Bill 57 all about?
Well, Bill 57 was some changes that the Minister of Indigenous Relations brought forward, and that bill actually has massive impact on the Métis settlements. What they've done is they've changed the governance structure at our central governance level, as well. They've made some changes that allow for changes at the community level, which those changes were already there before, that we've done that, been there, done that historically. So going from 5 to 3 if they wanted to, as well as they've put some wordage into the act that says that we can charge our members for services that we provide, which we already were doing and which we already had the authority and autonomy to do. So when I look at it, it really is an attack on the central governance of the Métis Settlements General Council. We have 4 executive here that deal with all of the government issues that we deal with. So we negotiate with the federal government as well as the provincial government. And they've said that we have to go from 4 down to 1 or 2. And it's very prescriptive. And, I look at this, Ryan, and I say, it's very double standard. We have they've said, your funds are running out. And just to clarify that as well, our funding for the governance of the Métis settlements, we pay for. It is not paid for by the province. It's not paid for by taxpayers. It is our communities, our membership, our money that we use to govern ourselves with. So I look at this and I say, how can a premier and his ministers and his whole cabinet sit there and even consider changing our governance structure when that province is incurring a deficit and our premier is sitting there expanding his cabinet? And I say, so this is do as I say, not as I do components. And again, it's a very colonial way of doing things. Someone sitting there telling us, this is what you have to do. And that's the problem with the Métis settlements right now, is that we're under what's called the Metis Settlements Act, which is an ameliorative act. It has nothing to do with rights for Métis people. And I'm not sure if you or your viewers know that in 2016, there was what was called the Daniels decision in the Supreme Court of Canada. And there, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government has the fiduciary responsibility to Métis people. And so in reality, we should be transferring from the provincial government and the provincial act to the federal government. And that's where it comes in the discussion about Section 35 rights. And so our move has been to move, and in order to do that, you have to be what's called Powley compliant, based on under the ruling that came out through Daniels. So to be Powley compliant, you've got to show that you had an ancestral tie to the Indigenous families, that you were in Alberta, pre-Alberta in this case of Alberta, and that you're accepted into the Métis communities. So that it's ancestry. You have to prove it. There's nothing in there about the percentage of how much Indigenous blood you have to have. So it's not based on quantum like the states are. So, I look at all of this and I just say, this province is putting hurdles in the way of Métis people who are Powley compliant to move forward with their Section 35 rights under the federal government. And, we question, where's the honor of the crown? And how is it that even this government, who made these changes under Bill 57, can do so without consulting the membership? We had a very prescriptive methodology set in place on how we were going to consult. And the minister knew very much about this agreement. His staff were working with us on this. And then because of COVID, we couldn't follow through with it, because there was a component in there that talked very explicitly about, we'll bring these changes forward to the elected representatives, the democratically elected representatives of the community, and then they'll put their input into it. And when we flesh something out, we'll then take it to our members and have our members look at this, have their input into this. And then from there, we would either do a referendum or a plebiscite to ensure that we were doing what our members wanted to be done. And all of this was left behind.
Yeah. And this, Herb, so you're, I guess it was back in March, right? I'm going to say you claim, but you understand why I'm using the language I am.
Yeah,
you say that settlement leaders didn't see legislation until it was tabled by the minister. In June, mid-June, on the 17th, it becomes law without membership having any real chance, is your position, to be heard by government. And so on July 27th, Métis Settlements General Council files this claim against the government of Alberta. This isn't exactly the trend that I think most people are expecting to see right now, considering, I mean, let me say this, Herb, the fact that you're wearing an orange shirt, and everybody, the minute that anybody's going to see you on YouTube right now wearing an orange shirt, they immediately are going to know what that's a reference to. They immediately are going to start thinking about residential schools and children that are being recovered and the national conversation about reconciliation. That's where everybody's at right now. Meantime, there's kind of this parallel storyline going on. Are you a little bit gobsmacked?
Totally, 100% gobsmacked. I look at this and I say, how out of touch is this government with the rest of Albertans and Canadians? I look at this, people are saying there should be reconciliation, and I look at the fact that it started out with 215 graves the unmarked graves they found. And I don't even like that terminology, unmarked graves. To me, these are kidnapped children who were murdered. And let's put the truth on the table. That's what's going on. Let's not just say that these are unmarked graves. And now we have 5,296 bodies that have been found. And we haven't even come in Alberta. We haven't even come to the 3 major sites that we know for a fact that there's a lot of people buried at. And those are Métis children. There's members of each of our communities that have been dramatically affected by this. And we have cyclical damages to the families and to the children and the grandchildren. And people wonder why it is that there's a distrust of the church, distrust of government, and distrust of the RCMP. Well, these are the 3 people who were all involved with stealing our children and murdering them. And then people say, well, get over this. Well, I look at it and I say, I'm sorry, it's very hard to get over this. There's been, and governments, they tend to throw some money and say, oh, here's $25,000 or whatever the amount is. Then, now we're going to eradicate the files. I look at this and I say, we should not be trying to erase the history of Alberta and the history of Canada when it comes to these kinds of things. We learn from them and then we address it through healing, and then we move forward. But the healing hasn't happened because the full truth has not come out, and the full truth has never been exposed. And yet we as Indigenous people have known this for over 100 years. We've spoken of this. We've advocated for this to be taken care of, and it's been ignored. And so finally, the truth is coming to the light. And it's time for Canada, for those who were involved in it and in Alberta, to own their shame. That this, I look at it and I say, you see war criminals persecuted, but not one person has been persecuted for the murder of all of these children. As an Indigenous people, I find it as a huge affront to us. And, I think, how do you expect us to have trust in a judicial system? How do you expect us to have trust in all of these mega structures when this is the truth of what we deal with?
If you're just tuning in, streaming audio on the Mixlr audio app, we're talking to the president of the Métis Settlements General Council, Herb Lehr. Herb, obviously your passion is evident. I know you feel strongly about this. I should note, and I should have probably noted in your introduction, you yourself, a survivor of the 60s scoop. Have you, I would imagine you don't just go from disappointment in government to a lawsuit. I would imagine that there was some correspondence in between. I would imagine that you've been in touch with the province, with the Minister of Indigenous Relations or the Premier's office or whomever. Can you take us through that and what the response has been?
I sure can, Ryan, and thank you for asking that. The province did come forward and say, and through the minister, and say, here's some changes that we would like to do. And the elected officials and the executive went through those changes and said, here's some that we agree with. These are changes that are outdated provisions of the Metis Settlements Act. And we were confident that our members would have no problem with us moving forward with those changes to the Act. However, all of these other ones, and I have to really clarify this, when he initially came to us with what he presented to us initially and what finally went through are night and day. There's a huge difference in this. So when I said that we did not see a lot of this stuff, I was speaking the truth on this. We were completely taken by surprise, and we were amazed that there were the ones that we had advocated for and said, here's things that the General Council has passed unanimously to move forward with, to have changes in the act, were completely ignored. So I look at that and I say, here's a minister who knew very well that the democratically elected people said no. Then he went ahead anyway. And then after he's already passed it through the first reading, then he has a town hall. And that town hall we need to recognize that in our communities, we have very limited internet, and the cell phones don't even work, and a lot of people don't have landlines. So our connectivity is some of the worst in Alberta. And the government's known this all along. We've met with Minister Nate Glubish as well on this. When I started in the presidency, we advised him of these issues. And this is not something that's unknown to them. But anyway, they had a town hall, and it was a very short time frame. And again, there was, selected people that we had nothing to do with this, and questions that we had that we wanted to put forward. And we weren't even recognized as speakers to be able to get in on this town hall. And it was a very few. There was one person that I saw have 3 questions, yet a whole bunch of us were ignored and were not given that opportunity. And what I found the greatest dismay is that I said to the minister, Minister, if you're so confident that these changes are what our members want, then please, let's have a referendum of them. Go and ask our people. And they refused to do that, and they just ran roughshod right over us so that they could accomplish their end game. And when I look at it and we try to figure out what is the end game, and a lot of it is they want to change us into become municipalities, that they want greater control, and they don't want us to move over to our Section 35 rights. And that's evidenced as well with the litigation brought forward by my brothers and sisters that are part of the Métis Nation of Alberta.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you what you think is motivating the government. So you think that's what it is?
The Métis Nation of Alberta has a litigation going forward based on lack of consultation without recognition of their Section 35 rights. And so when I look at that component, what we're litigating about, again, is a breach of our Section 35 rights. I know for a fact that I've spoken 3 times to the minister, and I've said to the minister that I personally am a Powley compliant Métis residing on the Métis settlements. So when I look at what Alberta's doing, they are actually racing against Canada on UNDRIP. They don't want to listen to UNDRIP. They don't want to have reconciliation here. And, I look at it and I still say we have a little bit of cowboy and Indian mentality in the province.
Wow. Of course, yeah, you're referencing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So ultimately, Herb, when it comes down to this, I want to make sure at the end of our conversation here that our audience members and everybody that's going to be downloading this podcast later understand clearly why this has come about. I think you've specified that, why you think it's happening now, what sort of an outcome you think. Obviously I'm asking for your speculation, for your opinion here, but ultimately what's the outcome you're looking for, and what do you want people to know? People are going to be discussing this with their friends, their colleagues, their coworkers. What's the most important thing from your perspective to keep in mind?
Okay, before I get into that, Ryan, I want to tell you that the Métis Settlements General Council has a memorandum of understanding and a framework agreement with the federal government to move forward under their Section 35 rights. We have a trilateral table that the province, the Métis Settlements General Council, and the federal government sit at. So they are well aware that we're moving towards Section 35 rights. What we expect with this litigation is that this is something that will take 3, 5, perhaps even 10 years to deal with. What we're working on is to create an injunction so that we can put a stay on this, so that this legislation, that the courts will rule that we have enough information, that we have enough just cause to put a stay in place so that we don't have to listen to this legislation. Because right now, under this ameliorative component, the minister has authority and autonomy to create changes to this act because it's ameliorative, it's not rights-based. And when I look at that, you also have to predicate that with the act also states that they cannot abrogate or derogate from our Section 35 rights. And we find this a direct infringement on those Section 35 rights.
Herb Lehr is the president of the Metis Settlements General Council, elected back in April of 2019, a member of the Fishing Lake Metis Settlement, where he served as an elected councillor, chief administrator for several terms, including as chairperson. Respect your passion, a whole hell of a lot. Thanks for making time for us.
Ryan, I really want to thank you that you're such a strong advocate for Albertans and Canadians, and I enjoy that you're taking forward contentious issues, and it's real talk for real people. Thank you so much.
Made my week, Herb. I appreciate that. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to shaking your hand in person, Herb. When we can get back to that, I'm looking forward to that. Wow. It's just, it's hard to wrap your mind around what's going on right now. And I know that elected, if you get the minister on here, if the minister would do an interview here, or if the premier would, they would say, well, what, there would be poly talk, right? It would be political speak. And they'd find some way to obfuscate it and create a bunch of clouds and murk and mire, and it's what they do. But they would talk about how it's important for the government to continue to establish working relationships with communities in a way that honors the traditions of the long-standing respect that's been held between elected officials and government and Métis people living. And it would turn into this. On the surface, what this is the president of the Metis Settlements General Council saying he can't get an audience with the government, even at a town hall, saying that they're not respecting the basic. I mean, when you have the president of the Metis Settlements General Council saying that the Alberta government is trying to get ahead of Canada and trying to get ahead of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that's a hell of a thing to hear. Make sure you let everybody know that you heard it here on Real Talk, and make sure you spread the word that this is where these conversations are happening. Of course, we appreciate every single person that shares a link to our content, that chimes in, that sends us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com as we keep these conversations going. This feels like a good time to remind you that our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park for the entire month of August have made a commitment to the Wekutuwin Society. It's their Every Child Matters, Every Cone Counts initiative. They've consulted with Indigenous community members, partners, and they asked where they could make a commitment that would really have a strong impact. And the Wekutuwin Society is proud to partner with these 6 Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, Y Gardens, and Baseline Road. They provide, the society does, these annual retreats for Indigenous women who are survivors of both residential schools and cancer, giving them an opportunity to work on their physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental health to return to their communities in leadership roles, empowered. What an amazing initiative. Encourage you at some point through the month of August to visit those 6 Dairy Queens, maybe all 6 of them if you're feeling up for it. $1 from every cone sold will go to that society. What a great initiative. Also want to remind you, it's Thursday, which means tomorrow is Trash Talk presented by Local Waste. You can send us your rant or your rave, even if it's just a couple of lines, even if it's something you just got to get off your chest. You wonder, is this petty? I had something petty I had to get off my chest to a friend the other day. I said, I know it's petty. And after I told her, she said, you're right, that is petty. And I said, but it felt great to get it off my chest. So thank you very much. It's presented by Local Waste. If you check them out online at localwaste.ca, you'll see how you can connect with them in Alberta and Saskatchewan. If you're looking for a bin, they can manage your construction, commercial, even residential waste and recycling collection, but they're also looking for partners. If you're an entrepreneur that sees an opportunity in your community, might be a good fit for Local Waste, Mikkel, Lauren, Chris would love to talk to you. Again, you can find them on their website, localwaste.ca. Well, it's been a couple of months. It's been a few months. As a matter of fact, it's been 4 of them since our next guest last joined us. He's the former Chief Medical Officer of Health for the province of Alberta. He's been the Director of the Public Health Laboratory, the Medical Officer of Health in the city here that we call home, and then, of course, as mentioned, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health. First in none of it. Then in Alberta, he's currently an adjunct professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. And one of the reasons why he's here right now, he's one of the signatories to an open letter to the Prime Minister asking, it's an urgent appeal for direct funding intervention, asking that Ottawa mitigate the risks of the Delta variant where the provincial government will not do so. Dr. James Talbot, it's great to have you back on the show. Thanks for making time for us. How have you been holding up? We haven't seen you for 4 months. You managing all right?
I am, thank you. I'm taking a little bit of time off on the coast right now, hiking, kayaking, and biking, and it's been great.
You want to talk to us about where you've been hiking? You want to tell a story? You got any good stories right now?
Well, we were out yesterday and we surprised a family of seals, and the mom, I did not realize that mums who are seals are fierce when they're defending their pups. I was actually afraid. So
I feel like
they seem so cute, but
yeah, I was going to say maybe there's a metaphor here for something.
The mama occurred to me.
The mama seal who can appear to be docile and sweet when you mess with her pups, I think they call them, right? Yeah, yep. She can go off. Yeah, there probably is a metaphor there. Let me ask you this. I mean, I think our audience is well familiar by now with the letter that we're talking about. It indicates that for the last year and a half, our children, say the signatories, including you, have been forced to give up much of their childhood to keep vulnerable members of society safe. And despite widespread availability of vaccines for people older than 12, we find ourselves at the start of a 4th wave with the highly contagious Delta variant. Elementary kids not yet eligible for vaccines remain at high risk. These are the types of words, right? 4th wave, highly contagious, that are going to get everybody's opinion. Before we get into why you signed this, why don't we get your assessment of where we're at right now with all of this?
Well, in Alberta, we're pretty solidly into a 4th wave, likely caused in the main because Delta is just far more transmissible, and that's likely because we carry more copies of the virus when we're infected with Delta than we did with Alpha or the original. So it just makes it more infectious. The second thing that's contributing is that at the beginning of the month, the province virtually wiped out all of the population kind of protections that were in place, telling people to mask indoors, having maximum capacities for indoor, and encouraging social distancing. And then they allowed super spreader events. And then on Monday, they're going to remove the last of the remaining protections, which is the ability to test people, trace their contacts, and make sure that people isolate. And the strongest example of that is that they're now saying if your laboratory tests positive for COVID, it's optional for you as to whether or not you have to isolate. And I just want to make that point a little bit more forcefully here. If there were 2 things that I thought could come out of this pandemic that would be really worthwhile in terms of protecting people in the future, it's 1, hand washing, which we've always been big fans of, and people have really stepped up to the plate. But the second is the message that if you're sick, don't go into work, don't go into school. And the message they're giving next week is going to totally undermine the idea that that's going to occur.
I bet you that's somebody that knows you, that cares about you, that's just super excited that you're live on Real Talk right now. They're just calling to let you know that they're watching. To be serious, though, let's not joke around about this. I mean, a lot of people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are extremely concerned. I think most especially considering the timing, to state the obvious, the kids are getting set to go back into schools. The letter here that you've signed on to directly references that. Let me ask you, you're talking about policy that is undermining other initiatives and best practices. If you were Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health right now, would this be happening?
I have spent my entire career developing systems that give us better information on what's happening in the community, surveillance systems. So what happens on Monday is we're going to blind those surveillance systems. So I would not my entire career says I'm not in favor of that. I think the better evidence you have, the better decisions that you make. And no, I don't agree. I didn't agree with the full opening, and we were quite vocal about that as a group of physicians. We knew it was going to cause the fourth wave, and there are two elements of that. Let's just talk about the fourth wave. 3 weeks ago, Alberta was at 50 cases per day. It's at 500. You don't really need much more evidence than that. It's almost all Delta. The positivity rate, which in inside baseball we follow pretty carefully, is now above 5%. So we're well and truly into a fourth wave. And look at the inequity. That's another one of those jargon terms, but for Albertans, I always translate it as unfairness. Right? The unfairness of the fourth wave is that, first of all, anybody who's under the age of 12 isn't eligible for the vaccine because we haven't had enough testing to know that it's safe. All right, so they're at risk no matter what. And we also know that not just kids who are in lower socioeconomic situations, but adults as well are going to be more vulnerable to the fourth wave. Some of them haven't gotten the vaccine, not because they're philosophically opposed to it, but because they haven't had the opportunity, because they're busy working, taking care of their family, doing childcare. So, that unfairness says that we really should be continuing to push the vaccine with positive, negative incentives. You saw in Quebec, which has, we're at about 67% with people who are fully immunized. In Quebec, it's over 80%. And they're bringing in vaccine passports. And immediately after they announced that, they got double the number of people coming in to be immunized. There's a whole range of positive and negative incentives that we could put in place that would mean that there was more protection for the people who still aren't immunized. And as the letter says, we're particularly concerned about kids under the age of 12.
I want to cite a Global News report that's just been released. Global News reaching out, they say, to every Canadian province, asking whether they'd be open to using a vaccine passport within their respective provinces or handing over necessary data to make domestic use a possibility. The Saskatchewan Ministry of Health said the province encouraged everyone to get vaccinated, but officials had no plans to implement a requirement to show proof of vaccination. Provincial spokesperson for Manitoba told Global News it had developed and adopted its own proof of vaccination document, which was already in use. They continue to have regular discussions with Alberta about domestic proof of vaccination and proof of vaccination documents for international travel. Alberta, when asked, said no in an emailed statement to Global News. Just acting like pricks, for starters. What do you think's going on right now? There's a bunch of talk about freedom and liberty, but what is going on?
I don't know. I mean, there's an announcement in the U.S. that big firms like Walmart are actually moving to mandate that their employees can't come back to work unless they're fully immunized. That's a negative incentive, but you can tell it's pretty effective. I think more and more, those of us who've been fortunate enough to get 2 doses of the vaccine and who continue to observe the rules just to make sure that we keep everybody safe are starting to question why there isn't a consequence and to your decision about to immunize or not to immunize. I think parents would feel more reassured in Alberta if they knew that teachers and other staff in schools would have to show proof of immunization. I know that people in long-term care and in hospitals, patients and clients of those facilities would feel a lot more secure knowing that everyone who took care of them was immunized. So I don't understand the motivation of the government. I think, as we said really early on in this, you can talk about rights, but when the virus is out there spreading really fast and potentially going to kill you, it's already infringing on your rights.
Donna's watching us live. She says, knowing the numbers of infections or cases always played into my behaviors, like shopping or taking part in outdoor activities. Not knowing leaves us either isolating or taking chances, and it feels completely unfair. That from Donna. How important do you think it is, Doctor, that the general public has statistics and data in front of them? When does it become our business, or when does it become justifiable for a government? I mean, I can see obviously political motivation. If the general public doesn't see case counts, doesn't see hospitalizations, they have no way to analyze or gauge where the province is at. But is this the right of the public to have access to this data, do you think, right now?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that one of the things that we rely on in public health is getting the information out there and having millions of people make good decisions as a consequence. And one of the things I loved about being Chief Medical Officer of Health in Alberta was that Albertans are very practical, very sensible people. And so, we've beaten the virus 3 different times, and the government didn't beat it. The healthcare system didn't beat it. It was millions of Albertans making decisions every day, just like Donna was talking about. Am I going to wear my mask? That place looks pretty crowded and a lot of people not wearing masks. Should I really go in there? Am I going to attend this event? Am I going to tell family members that I'm 75 years old and I would really prefer that they stand at the door and talk to me from outside, or that we meet by a pad app of some kind so that we can stay safe? I mean, literally millions of Albertans making decisions that the government couldn't cover in their wildest dreams. But if you give them the facts, it gives them the opportunity to exercise that common sense.
We've heard from the provincial health minister, Tyler Shandro, that this is a decision that was based on Dr. Deena Hinshaw's recommendations, Alberta's current Chief Medical Officer of Health. He says it's an evidence-based decision. He says the science backs the decision. I've seen many members of the public demanding access to or enlightenment around what science he's referring to. Is there a justification here that maybe not everybody would agree with, but is there valid scientific justification for making the decisions that the Alberta government has made?
I think that there are 2 things that are important when you ask that question. The first is the evidence there, and have the public had the chance to examine it, test it, give it the smell test, the rest of it. And so far, that's not happened. We haven't seen a model. This is a government that depended on models in the beginning. We haven't seen a model for how big the 4th wave they think is going to be. We haven't seen a model for how many deaths there might be. We haven't seen a model for their projections on long COVID and how much long-term disability is going to result because we allow it to circulate in the community. We haven't seen the statistics, admittedly rare, on how many children might end up dying as a consequence of these decisions. There are children in ICUs in the US, in places that have lower immunization rates than us, but not that much lower, that suggests that that's a risk. So that's one. And the second, besides having the evidence, is the timing. So where does it make sense that the province with the second lowest immunization rate opens the widest when provinces with higher immunization rates are being more cautious? And so I think with that in mind, the evidence is still really important, but you have to question the timing. Why do it now? Why not wait until people are going back to work, schools are starting to open, and we get a chance to see how that's working before we go ahead and throw the doors wide open, which is what we've done.
Newspaper columnist David Staples is not a doctor. I am not a doctor. You are. So let me read his tweet. I want to get you to respond. He grabs everyone's attention by wondering what the bloody hell is Alberta's Dr. Deena Hinshaw doing? And then he follows up by saying she's leading Canadians, kicking and screaming out of this wretched pandemic to the sanity and relief of herd immunity and better public health. He goes on to say, I'm pretty sure this is the best Canadian example of real leadership under immense pressure I have seen in my lifetime. He says this view of Dr. Hinshaw is not widespread right now, but it will be. Your response?
I've known Deena Hinshaw for 20 years, and the chief MOH that people saw throughout this pandemic, where they could sense her decency, her honesty, her dedication, and her intelligence is exactly the person I've known for that 20 years. And she's exactly that same person today. You don't change that. This is a difficult situation in which we have a virus that was pretty much unknown 18 months ago, 2 years ago, in which the science is still coming in, and we're learning more things about it, and the virus is changing. So it is possible for good people to disagree about the evidence. So I do respect Dr. Hinshaw, and in some ways, I hope that David Staples is right. But the problem is that as a physician, and many of the people on the letter are physicians, I have to consider what happens if things go wrong. And we're not recommending that people stay in complete lockdown now. That's a false argument. We're just saying that we would appreciate it if things were done a little more cautiously and in a more fair way.
Let me say this. I've got a ton of respect for you, and I have respect for the office of Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health. I've never met Dina Hinshaw personally. I don't know her personally. I respect how much you respect her, and you've always approached this with candor and professionalism, which is not always possible, and I've always appreciated your willingness to take a question head on. But you just said to us, as a medical professional, you have to consider what happens if this doesn't work out, and it strikes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Albertans, that the current CMOH is not doing that. I mean, you're talking about how policy right now, and I'll acknowledge what you're about to say, which is that ultimately this comes down to government, right? This ultimately is the decision of the Minister of Health and probably the decision of the Premier, if we're being honest. So maybe it's not fair to put it on Dr. Hinshaw's shoulders, but they're putting her in that position. They're saying this is based on her advice, and you're telling me that it flies in the face of everything. You're saying that it undermines everything else. I just don't understand. I recognize that you respect her as a person. You've known her for 20 years. I get those dynamics. It's like me, Tom Olson. He's the CEO of the Canadian Energy Centre, the War Room. He was my first boss at the Calgary Herald. He's actually a great dude. He's doing a terrible job. And it is my job to go on the record and say, Tom, I love you. I'll buy you a beer every time I see you, but unbelievably bad job. It's tough to do sometimes. I recognize you respect her, but I don't understand how you can continue to support her if what you're saying here is true, that you think this flies in the face of evidence.
So you already made a big part of what I'm about to say clear, so I'm just going to try to add some stuff around the edges. Dr. Hinshaw has said that she presented this as a course to the government. The government is saying that it was her decision. This is a government that has refused to make public any of the advice that Dr. Hinshaw has given up until now. There had been multiple questions over the past 15 months of what was recommended by Dr. Hinshaw and what the government actually did. So this is the one time that they decide that they're going to make this public. They didn't say that about the decision to throw Alberta wide open at the beginning of July, which is what's really triggering the fourth wave, and for which the other decision about contact tracing is a kind of an additional problem, but it's not as big a problem as the decisions that were made back in July. So I have problems with the fact that they're being very selective about this. Nothing that they've said is inconsistent with Dr. Hinshaw presenting three options to them, one of which was eliminating tracing, contact tracing and isolation, and two others, and they chose this one and say, well, it was Dr. Hinshaw's recommendation from us. There's nothing inconsistent with that story in anything that they've said. Having said that, this is a government that I have to say, and it's mentioned in the letter, so I'm not the only one who thinks about it, that decided that it was okay for members of the government to travel internationally for clearly non-essential reasons, and didn't do very much about it. So in terms of the leadership that you hope you get from the government in terms of walking the walk, Dr. Hinshaw clearly did not travel outside the country, even though she has one of the most exhausting jobs in the country. And it's also a government that decided it was okay not to obey their own regulations around restaurants. So I have to say, in a contest between someone that I've known for 20 years, who's never done a single action that she should be ashamed of, and a group of people who did so in public and were unapologetic, I just don't find them very convincing.
James, Dr. Talbot, I have always appreciated your willingness to take these questions, fastballs right down the middle, and I appreciate your availability, most especially while you're on vacation. We wish you happy hiking, happy paddling, and I'll look forward to the next time our paths cross in person.
Thanks so much.
You got it. That's Dr. James Talbot. That's not an easy line to walk that he just walked. He just said a whole lot. If you're reading between those lines, maybe not even reading between the lines, I can respect that. What's he implying? Let's say it plainly. She's getting thrown under the bus. They're not taking her advice. He believes that ultimately, I'll tell you what I want. I want to read her book 2 years from now. Interesting insight from a guy who knows exactly what he's talking about because he's done that job, Dr. James Talbot, who just signed an open letter that reads in part, he put his name on this, almost every expert in the country and indeed around the world have expressed profound concern about the trajectory Alberta is now on. Our children will pay the price for this enormous gamble, and while they may not overwhelm the healthcare system, they will face the consequences of increasing hospitalizations as well as the unknown long-term repercussions when COVID runs rampant through an unvaccinated population. The Alberta government has abdicated its moral responsibility to the citizens of Alberta. That is not a joke. We'll have the link to that interview up shortly as soon as we go off air, and we encourage you to share that with everybody that you know should hear that. And again, our thanks to Dr. James Talbot. We're going to talk in just a moment to the Director Emeritus of the China Institute at the University of Alberta, find out what's possible with regards to a Canadian response to a horrific circumstance, quite frankly, a court in China convicting a Canadian businessman, Michael Spavor, of espionage, sentencing him to 11 years in prison. He's been detained alongside a fellow Canadian, Michael Kovrig, since 2018. I'm sure you're familiar with the background, but we'll get into that with Gordon Houlden in just a moment. I wanted to remind you right now that if you are going to be heading away, if you're finally getting ready to take a deep breath and get the heck out of Dodge for a while, you know, if you're looking to book a trip right now, starting October 31st, you can fly nonstop from Alberta's capital city, Edmonton, out of the Edmonton International Airport to San Diego with Swoop, nonstop starting October 31st. While you're making plans, why not book your self-parking spot at jetsetparking.com. jetsetparking.com. You won't get any closer for the price. Check this out. You go on the website, you can book your spot, and if you use the promo code REALTALK, I'm going to scream this from the rooftops, you can park for $5 a day at the airport. That's ridiculous! The promo code REALTALK gets you airport parking at JetSet Parking for $5 a day for any travel by the end of 2022. They are locally owned, and you will love them. We guarantee it. We also wanted to remind you that the teams at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge right now are making way for the brand new Grand Cherokees. They're coming in. This next generation Grand Cherokee, Jeep has invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars into the development. It is a stunning vehicle. I've had a chance to see it for myself. It means they've got new 2021s that have got to go, including the 2021 Grand Cherokee Laredo. These are great trucks. I've driven one. You can get them nicely equipped right now for under $47,000 at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge Jeep. If you're looking for them online, you can find them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Well, let's get into this story. As you know, a court in China just a short time ago, a couple of days ago, convicting Michael Spavor of espionage, sentencing him to 11 years in prison. Michael Kovrig remains detained as well. And oh yeah, there's the story of Robert Schellenberg, whose appeal to a death sentence for drug trafficking recently denied. The two stories unrelated, or are they? Gordon Houlden is Director Emeritus of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. He worked with the Canadian Foreign Service. Prior to that, posted to Havana, Hong Kong, Warsaw, Beijing, and executive director of the Canadian Trade Office in Taipei. He's seen a whole heck of a lot. We're grateful, Mr. Houlden, that you've agreed to make time for us today. Welcome to the show, and thanks for this.
It's a pleasure, and I very much enjoyed your previous show on the sitting here at the University of Alberta in my office now. I was fascinated by everything you had to say in that last segment. But my life has been China, at least the last, 35th year and full-time work on China. It's complicated as well.
Isn't it? And I feel like we have an impossible task right now trying to understand the dynamic between China and Canada, or China and the rest of the world. I know that a lot of Canadians right now are demanding more action from the federal government. I've seen people demanding sanctions. Why don't we get, in your mind, in your assessment, the significance of what's going on right now with the so-called two Michaels, most especially this 11-year sentence just a couple of days ago?
Sure. Well, for the last 2.5 years, the relationship has basically been paralyzed by the Madame Meng from the Chinese side, her detention in Vancouver on an extradition warrant, and from Canadian perspective, of course, my own as well, by the detention of two Michaels. One, Michael Spavor, the Canadian, the Calgarian, my hometown, who was sentenced yesterday to 11 years in prison. And that combination of things, the two Michaels and Meng, as long as those cases are before us, or before the governments of China and Canada, there's not going to be any significant forward movement. 2.5 years on, it's hard to imagine circumstances normalizing in any way until those are out of the way. And if I'd like to think we're in the middle innings, that we're weeks or a couple of months away from settlement with the two Michaels back with their families safely in Canada. But I have no guarantee of that. We could have this wrapped up in the fall. We could be talking about this, I hope not, 5 or 10 years from now, God forbid.
Is it as simple as Canada making things right with China? And feel free to take issue with the wording of that, Doctor, but around the detainment of Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive, is it that simple? And if so, what might be the implications? I'll note a different administration with President Biden versus President Trump, but is Canada also considering its relationship with its biggest trading partner and its next door neighbor?
Well, I don't think it's as simple as making it right. For one thing, I think the relationship, the character of it has changed in a permanent way. Canadians are now very wary. You're almost getting down now in terms of positive views of China to like error in polling, uncertainty. 14% I saw last year in an analyst poll, Canadians who hold a positive view of China. I don't think that's going to change quickly. And I think, quite frankly, all of those are responsibility for managing that relationship. The government of Canada and the party that happens to be in power at any moment, they're all going to have to look at China as a different place or through different eyes than was the case prior to December 2018. Even after we've solved this, I don't think we go right back to where we were on November 30th, 2018. I know we can't because of the views of Canadians, and quite frankly, even the views of many Chinese have shifted as well.
Doctor, I'm going to be honest. I'm actually nervous to ask you this question because I don't mean any disrespect to anybody. But something occurred to me yesterday. I was doing some background reading, preparing to talk to you, and I thought, I've never actually heard anybody ask an expert if it's actually possible that Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig really are spies. Is it possible?
Well, you ask a very delicate and important question.
I understand.
Michael Kovrig, like me, I had 5 China postings. He worked in China. The Chinese don't appreciate the fact that foreign diplomats poke around, try and figure what's happening. I did that I had postings in communist countries on 3 continents. And in each one of those, my job was, and I did it as best of my abilities, to poke around and find out what's really happening. That annoys them. The Chinese. But the Chinese didn't realize when they detained Kovrig, I don't want to get too much into inside baseball here, but in the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations and Diplomatic Relations, the provisions there, you can never question anyone or act against them on the basis of their previous assignment. Now, when he was arrested, he's now working for International Crisis Group, which is a consulting firm. But the Chinese, when they questioned him, had no right to ask him what he had done when he was a diplomat posted in China. When we pointed that out to them, not me, but the government, I think they stopped that line of question. As for Mr. Spavor, he was working on a delicate file, North Korea, in a delicate part of China, Dandong, which is right on the border of the Yellow River. Across the river, you could see it. Probably from where he was living, you can see North Korea. It's dark at night, unlike Dandong on the Chinese side. The Garretts, Canadian couple who were arrested several years ago, eventually freed, were also living in Dandong. This is a sensitive border area. So I don't doubt that the Public Security Bureau and the Chinese are thorough about this. Maybe even the Ministry of State Security have fat, thick files. I do not believe in any way that either of the individuals was a spy, but when a police agency, particularly one as thorough as the Chinese one, observes you for years and years, out of that, they can build some kind of a case. And that's why we don't want our own national government or security agencies in this country tracking and reporting everything you do. I mean, you can pick and choose. You can, journalists can make a case one way or the other if they choose to be biased, unfair. So I guess that's a long answer to a short question. No, they were not spies. They are not spies. They have done nothing, in my opinion. They should have brought down the suspicion of the Chinese authorities onto them. And they would be free and still living in China if it hadn't been for Madame Meng. So that's what also convinces me that there's nothing behind any accusation they've done anything wrong. But when in December 1st, 2018, someone in the hierarchy of the Chinese Communist Party said, well, let's grab a couple of theirs and see how they react. And they look at, I'm sure, a long list. Here's a couple of people who've been here a long time, working on sensitive issues. Let's grab them. Mm-hmm. That hasn't worked out well for China. It certainly hasn't worked out well for us. So just to be crystal clear, no, these were not spies. But if you take voluminous records of taped conversations and monitoring, anybody who lives in China is going to be taped and monitored on an occasional basis. You can make something out of nothing.
Dr. Houlden, one of our live viewers here, Dwayne, says China's a superpower with allies. We don't want another world war to happen. I'm not sure we're talking about world war, but even talk around economic sanctions. I mean, you ask Canadian canola producers, or you ask people that work with timber or aluminum or anything else, what happens when you tick off China? There can be major economic implications. Like I said earlier, I've seen some people on social media demanding that the prime minister or this federal government impose sanctions on China, which I don't know if you might characterize that as laughable or not, but what tools does Canada's government and Canada's diplomats, what do they have in their toolbox that you can see them utilizing? What position does Canada have in this right now?
There's a host of things that we could do that would annoy or potentially even to some extent hurt China. I'm not convinced that there's an arrow in the quiver that will free the two Michaels, other than the question of Madame Meng. Sometimes it's tempting when you have two people who are unfairly imprisoned to say we should do anything, everything that will free them. But governments have to take a longer term view, in my opinion. Our trade with China, counterintuitively, actually grew last year, went up by some 8%. That's our exports. Our exports grew by 8%. Our exports on average of the rest of the world, including the United States, dropped by 11%. We are only 5% in this province, 5% dependent, roughly 5% dependent on China trade in terms of exports for the whole country. But the potential is huge. It's not a likelihood, it's virtually a certainty that in this decade, the Chinese economy, based on current growth rates, will pass the United States in size. I was on a moderating session with the Chinese ambassador to the United States a few months ago, along with the man who wrote Thucydides, Are China and the United States Destined for War? Chinese ambassador noted, well, with a population 4 times that of the United States, it shouldn't be that surprising that in a few decades, their economy will be 2 or 3 times as large. He's right. It is a possibility. So for a country that's so trade dependent, we have to be a bit careful about casually putting them in the enemy category. I worked on the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. It ended about the beginning of the 1990s, and it sort of ended the best possible way for the West. The good guys won, the bad guys lost. It ended without a fight, but it wasn't just the Korean Missile Crisis. There was other times when there was a chance of an intercontinental nuclear exchange, which would have been more or less civilization ending. I'm not a happy Cold War warrior who wants to go down that path with China. I think a lot of hard-thinking American policy people don't want to either. God forbid, we may end up there. But let's not be in a rush. Let's think hard before we do things. And let's look very carefully. Will this actually achieve our goals, or will it simply make us feel good?
The story of Robert Schellenberg has been told as well, of course, across the country to familiarize people who may not recognize his name. He's the Canadian who was arrested and convicted essentially of drug trafficking, drug smuggling, I should say. He appealed his sentence and was then sentenced to death. That appeal just recently denied. You feel terrible for someone in that circumstance. I don't know the reality of what's true or what's not. Is this a completely unrelated story to the two Michaels? Is the only common thread that all three of them are Canadian, or does this have relevance to the bigger conversation that we're having as well?
I think it has some relevance to the bigger conversation. I am, however, careful to separate his case from that of the two Michaels. In his instance, I have no idea about his guilt or innocence. He's been convicted in a Chinese court. I have no idea if that was a conviction based on evidence or not. This was pre the detention of Madame Meng. However, he has been convicted twice, I believe, in Canada, including one charge which involved trafficking in a narcotic. So on that basis, I hesitate to put him exactly in the same category as the two Michaels. However, I don't believe in the death penalty. Some Canadians do, some Canadians don't. Question how fair it is. But here's the part that does tie it to the broader case of Madame Meng and two Michaels. He had the extraordinary bad luck to appeal his 15-year sentence in November of 2018. December 1st, you then have the Madame Meng detained. And then, of course, very quickly, his appeal was denied, and the sentence raised from 15 years to the death penalty. That would not have occurred, in my opinion. I'm confident that would not have occurred had it been for Madame Meng. So he's also wrapped up in this great mess. I have no idea, again, whether he's guilty or innocent. The two Michaels are not spies. They are innocent. In his case, he may have been guilty of drug offense. He may not have been. But you just slap on the death penalty, and a reaction to something a foreign court does is hardly, it sort of underlines the differences between our system and theirs. And so that, for that reason, I have sympathy for him, and I hope that there's still a possibility his case could be commuted. China sometimes will commute a death sentence on good behavior. There's something called suspended death sentence. If you behave well in prison, after a period of 2 years in jail, they can commute it to a life sentence. And that would be a preferable situation to what he's in right now. And then who knows, down the road, he might be eventually expelled. I don't think he's coming home anytime soon. But there's suspicious things, obviously suspicious, dodgy things about his treatment as well, particularly that 15 years to death.
Yeah. Gordon, before we thank you for your time, I just want to circle back on your opinion on the role that you think the United States and, quite frankly, the president should play in this dispute between Canada and China. I mean, it essentially, and I may be guilty of oversimplifying this, but it kind of feels like the Americans' fault. And it kind of feels like who's supposed to be our best friend, our big brother, if you want to call it that, or at least our neighbor, isn't being a very good neighbor right now. I can understand why the Americans wouldn't want to cause any further problems with the Chinese, but is there acknowledgement that Canada wouldn't be in this pickle if it wasn't because of their request to detain Madame Meng, as you've detailed?
Yeah, I come down firmly on both sides of that. I mean, on the one hand, I do believe that the Americans care about the two Michaels. They care about arbitrary detentions, us today, them tomorrow, that sort of thing. On the other hand, you're quite right. If it hadn't been for the American sanctions on Iran, which are not Canadian sanctions, we wouldn't be here. I think the Americans care about the two Michaels. I don't think they're lying awake at night in Washington worrying about the fact we've got a bad relationship with China. They may even be quietly pleased at that because some of the things that we were thinking of doing, free trade agreement, et cetera, would have been controversial. They didn't particularly fancy that. I know that for a fact. I go to Washington on a regular basis. They hold the key here. I believe that this case that we're involved in with our two Michaels can be seen as a subset of the broader struggle between the United States and China. It's one part of it, and we're involved in that. The United States is our essential ally. We're not going to pull free of that. But yes, they do have responsibility for this, and they've put us in a bind.
Interesting to see where that goes. Dr. Gordon Houlden is a professor of political science, adjunct professor at the Alberta School of Business, the U of A, an adjunct professor at the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, and director emeritus of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. Real pleasure to connect. Thanks for making for us understandable what I think can obviously be a very complex scenario. We appreciate your analysis.
Well, thank you very much for your time and that of your listeners.
You got it. You can follow, by the way, Dr. Houlden on Twitter at Gordon Houlden, and we link to that with a tweet from our account at Real Talk RJ every morning. That's Sarah Hoyle's doing a great job behind the scenes. I always like when a guest is in the bullpen, in the green room, the virtual green room, so to speak, and they're taking in the interview from the guest before and going, yeah, I really enjoyed that one. It's kind of cool. It's, from expert opinion to expert opinion, it's what we promise. It's what we commit to bringing you every single weekday. And we appreciate those of you that are along for these conversations. I've seen, on our live chat here, for example, Tony was speaking out quite strongly about going, where are the Americans in all this? They kind of feel the same way. You wonder, it was just kind of like how that all started. Wouldn't it be amazing to get the receipts, to do a Freedom of Information request and see the first email that probably came across that was like, hey, there's a Huawei executive that's going to be flying into Vancouver. If you guys wouldn't mind, would you send a couple RCs over there and detain her for us? Yeah, I mean, what's the deal? Well, yeah, there's some things with some income taxes and other, not income taxes, but some corporate stuff. Yeah, if you could just go ahead, cuff her for us, just take her into custody, and then we'll see. And then the next thing you know, you've got an international incident, to say the very least. Our thanks to Dr. Gordon Houlden for that. Now, we keep reminding you about this amazing event that's coming up in Edmonton, and that's because I know that the team at the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra is really excited about this, and so we're doubling down on our excitement to remind you that Symphony Under the Sky is back to William Hawrelak Park from August 26th through September 5th. So whether you want to hear the ESO, by the way, all back together in its not there, right? It is the orchestra together in its entirety. I like to get nerdy about this kind of stuff, although I might be wrong. Some real talker with a PhD in English will come at us and remind me they're together in its entirety. It's together in... Why don't I just move on?
Move along.
The orchestra back for the first time since March of 2020. If you're like me, you'd love to hear the ESO play the theme from Frozen and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Beauty and the Beast and Jurassic Park, but then maybe you also want to hear Mozart and Beethoven and Tchaikovsky's epic 1812 overture. They're going to be doing it all. Tickets start at $20, and there's grass seating that is free to kids 17 and under, accompanied by an adult. You can find out more information at windspearcenter.com. The ESO Symphony Under the Sky, August 26th through till September 5th. Is this a true story about our next guest? You kidding me? Just through an iconic career that saw him start out playing the pubs and the coffee houses and the roads and the highways of Ontario and then the rest of Canada, and then wound up with at least 8 Junos, 17 albums, an induction into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, an officer of the Order of Canada, Tom Cochrane, making his Real Talk debut this morning. My man, welcome to the show, and thank you for making time for us. It's so good to see you.
Ryan, it's my pleasure, buddy. It's I'm just excited that the Edmonton Symphony is going to be back up and running. That is exciting stuff.
I just had our production team hand me a note that says that you have played with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra, which shouldn't surprise me. Do you remember the experience?
Yeah, a number of times we've done shows with them, pared down as well as a full orchestra. But one of my favorite records of all time was Conquistador by Procol Harum, and that was one of the first rock albums that was done with a full orchestra. And of course it was the Edmonton Symphony. And there were a lot of members in the symphony when we did symphony sessions back in 1986. Wow. It's a while ago, Ryan? But we were one of the first Canadian groups. We're the first actually to do a symphony session with the Edmonton Symphony. My only regret is we didn't film it. And I remember EMI Capital at the time said we should be filming this, and we had been on a long run in the States. We were exhausted and stuff. I was running a fever, so I had the flu at the time. Ironically, we're talking about that, but and we came in day before we did a rehearsal with the incredible late great George Blondheim. You probably knew George, Ryan, just one of the greats, the great Edmonton, people, patriots, great, incredible musician, incredible person. Did a lot of stuff for charity. Anyways, he passed away last year, or a year and a half ago. Loved the man, but he put it together. He helped arrange it. He orchestrated it, and it's probably the most popular, the most endeared Tom Cochrane and Red Rider record that we ever did was the Edmonton Symphony. So those 2 nights were so important to me for many, many reasons, and to us, as a band back then, and just incredible memories. So another moment in Edmonton history for me, that along with the Oilers, just before they won the cup, those guys all being backstage at the Jubilee and hanging out with Koff. I still play golf with Koff quite a bit, maybe 4 times a summer, and talk to Kevin a lot, and Daryl Cates is a good buddy. He's just an incredible man, one of the great owners, I think, in my opinion. I'm biased because we're good friends, but he, and you guys deserve another championship, and maybe next year. You got Zach Hyman now. He's going to be a good one. He's going to get a lot of points for you guys. He's going to help the cause there with a lot of heavy forechecking.
Yeah, they opened up the wallet a little bit for Hyman and to extend, as you know, Darnell Nurse on the blue line, and now so they've got these pieces in place. I know a lot of people excited to see how that plays out. Are you an Oilers fan, or are you you've got a whole bunch of buddies within the organization?
Yeah, I would say I'm an Oilers fan. I'm one of these odd people that are, I think it would be monumental for Toronto to win a cup. Yeah. So I kind of share my allegiance, but I am a big Oilers fan. Yeah, I mean, I got such a rich history with the organization. Like I said, we were there. It seemed like almost every second week in the heyday of the band, of the team, and just have some great stories. I played at the retirement of Messier's jersey. And so that was really important for me. And I was really honored to do that. And just so many functions, we opened up the new building. I was involved in the Heritage game, the first big Heritage game. A great story with that one, though, with Gretz. We were on stage. So they set up the stage for the people that weren't there, because there were a lot of people there. I think they had 12,000 people in the building. And at Rexall Place, or whatever they were calling it there, I think Rexall Place. And then, we were on stage. I did Big League, and I was going to Afghanistan the next week. So I said, I'd like to dedicate this song. Of course, it's a hockey song about a boy and his dad. And these guys are all huge heroes to me. I said, but heroes to all of us are men and women overseas in the armed forces. And so I played the song, left the stage, went to my little dressing room, and by myself, all of a sudden the door swings open. And you got to remember that there's 12,000 people there, and the players are all being interviewed by Ron McLean. And the door swings open, and it's Gretz. And Gretz goes, "Tommy, need to use your latrine." He says, "I got to take a whiz." So he goes over there, and he's taking a whiz, and he looks over his shoulder and goes, "I want to do something. Me and Guy, tomorrow, we want to send a special message to the men and women over there in Afghanistan. So we're going to do a special video, me and Guy Lafleur. He'll do it in French, and I'll do it." I said, "That'd be great, Wayne. That's fantastic. Okay, got to run." And apparently everybody's on stage going, "Where the hell's Wayne gone?" Like, because Ron wanted to interview him at that point, and he ducks off stage, right? Yeah. So, he's such a classy guy, and such a classy organization. Anyways, we went over there. We played that tape, and you had all these guys, these Rangers that were actually going out on duty in their gear and that were going out to patrol at night. And they had a couple of guys just terribly, a few weeks earlier that blew up on an IED. It was just horrible. And so, it was pretty heavy. And these guys, big, huge guys, strapped guys, and Canada's finest, and the women as well. And their tears are streaming down their eyes when they're watching that video of Gretz and Guy Lafleur. So just, that's how important home is for Canadians and the armed forces when they're away, and that's how much impact those guys had, and Gretzky and Guy Lafleur had, and they're heroes for everybody. So it was really neat, it was such an inspiring moment.
That's an amazing story behind the scenes. I'm trying to think. I can think of several moving moments through my own history of consuming content, being moved by emotional videos and sentiments. And Big Leagues has been the soundtrack for many of those. When you wrote that song, did you have a sense that you were onto something special? That song resonates with people, like whether it's like sports parents or anybody else from any context. People apply the spirit of those lyrics, it seems, to their own lives, and it draws something out of people. Did you feel like you had lightning in a bottle when you wrote that one?
When I was told the story, and it was in Northern Ontario, and it was a custodian at the rink up there, and he told me the story of his son, and I hadn't heard the tense that he was speaking in. So I said, "Well, you bring him to the show." He said he's was a huge fan of Boy Inside the Man. I said, "Bring him to the show." And of course, he told me the story, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just knew at that moment that it was a song. It was a song at that moment. And I think, 8 months later, 10 months later, Kenny and I had rented a house to our version of Big Pink to pre-produce the record. It was just nothing but recording equipment. And I had one room upstairs that I meditated in. I had a mattress in a boom box, and to record ideas on, and my guitar, and I meditated there for about 20 minutes, and I woke up and I wrote that song. It's probably the only time this has ever happened in my life. I wrote that song in 20 minutes. So how long is the song? 4 minutes? But it had been formulating in my head, and it was such a heavy moment for me. And I did know, I really felt when I wrote it, like this is a song that's going to impact a lot of people. And prior to the Humboldt, the horrible incident in Humboldt, I had said to people, I said, hockey is a sport that unifies all these small communities, in particular across Canada. That's so important. When I was flying in yesterday to Regina, and you're looking at all these little communities, and they're like islands out there. And then you got wheat fields, and you've got canola fields and all this stuff. But then you have these little, the farms and that, and they're all far apart. And hockey's such an important galvanizing force for all these communities across the prairies and all across Canada that pulls us together. And I had no idea just how right I was until that horrible incident in Humboldt, and how not just Canada, but the world empathized with those kids and with the people that died and their coaches and that. And it just was such a heavy thing. So I dedicated it to anytime I'm here, and in a lot of places, I've kept the changed third verse in honor of the people that died in Humboldt, and I always dedicate it to them, especially obviously in Saskatoon, and tonight in Regina I'll be doing that again, and I'll do it in Edmonton as well, because there was a number of boys from there.
Yeah, there sure were.
Jackson, of course, and I always remember them when I play the song. So I kind of look at that song as a trust, that one, and then Lunatic Fringe in a different way is kind of, I want people to listen. I want them, I want the song to resonate with them. And so I kind of look at it as a trust that we got to play those songs. We got to be on our game when we play those songs and really deliver them, because they're important to people. A lot of people grew up with those songs.
I was we partner with St. Albert Dodge, and one of the principals there is Alan Wack. They lost their son Steven in that crash, and Steven's Broncos jersey is up in the dealership. And I was just walking up the stairs and I saw it. And you stop in your tracks and you sit and you think. And I think that there was something about that, like you said. I mean, the Kickstarter was one bit of evidence of how that story resonated with people around the world. And I think for obvious reasons too, right? You have parents, you could even, as a veteran of the music industry, Tom, like I would imagine there's parents that have seen their kids touring or moving off to attend a Royal Conservatory School or whatever the case may be. Parents can relate to the kid chasing a dream and making the sacrifices that go along with it. And a lot of times that involves getting on buses, getting on planes. And I think it's just something that resonates with so many people. Remarkable how your music could bring Canadians together in that way. What an experience. I should mention, you're going to be...
I mean, Ryan, and I'm glad you mentioned the bus thing, because it's pivotal. It's kind of a cultural entity, really, in Canada. I mean, we just have to cover so much territory. So Life's a Highway is a metaphor that, I knew that would be a hit of some kind, because it's that's what Canada's about. I mean, we join so many communities with highways and that, and the buses are a very important part of that. So yeah, it does, and all over the world, in the States as well. So it does resonate for people. So it's good you brought that up.
There's no point to me telling you this, but I used to serve and bartend at Earl's Willow Park, a restaurant in South Calgary. I don't know if you would have known this, Tom. I'd be surprised.
Dinner at Earl's last night.
Yeah, well, they've since, this was because I'm not as young as I look, Tom. So this was years ago, but they did a big they did a big renovation over the bar, and they brought in this massive piece of ironwork. It was probably honestly 60 feet by 30 feet, and it hung over the bar like a wave. It was a really dramatic piece of welding artistry, and carved into it was "Life is a Highway." And so I bartended under your lyrics for several years. That song, it's bananas how it's connected. I know you're probably sick of talking about it, Tom. I hope you don't roll your eyes, but we were just having we're having some fun with our audience. We've asked our audience to let us know what's their favorite Tom Cochrane song of all time. Would you have a guess maybe on what song you think might be getting the top vote?
Big league for me, but the Neruda album as an album, but obviously Life's a Highway. I mean, I think Mick Jagger was asked once, like, man, you got to be tired of playing Satisfaction. He says, yeah, I'm really tired of looking out there and seeing tens of thousands of people lose their mind and go crazy and making people laugh and sing and dance to that song. And I feel the same way. How can you not love a song that brings that much joy into people's lives, especially being the miserable SOB that I can be? A lot of time, it's pretty amazing that I wrote one of the happier hits ever written, but I feel really privileged to have written that song. And every time we play it, we have a gas. It's just so, I'm a real believer in that energy that we exchange as human beings, and you just. I get so much energy that radiates from the audience and the people that are listening to that song every time we play it. And it's just, how can you get tired of that? You know what I mean? Kidding. I mean, if I sat in a room and played it right now, I'd be bored as shit.
Yeah. I might think
if I sit at home singing that song to myself.
If I see you by yourself at an airport departure lounge picking away on a banjo, that we might have some questions to answer, Tom, to shed some light on it. At this point, early in the Twitter poll, 66%, 2 out of 3 respondents are choosing Life as a Highway, but we've left opportunity. Mad World, No Regrets, and then the write-in as well. Good Times from Victory Day, getting Boy Inside the Man, the untouchable one. Big League, people are loving, of course. And then a lot of people are talking about the album you did with Edmonton Symphony, which is amazing. How did you? We were just talking before we welcomed you to the show about how the ESO is.
Now I got a good tip on the set list. The songs I got.
There you go. Yeah. By the way, August 14th. Tom Cochrane in Edmonton at the Edmonton Exhibition Lands, playing with Glass Tiger at Rockfest. That's coming up in 2 days. Do you go way back with those guys, Glass Tiger?
Yeah, Alan Fruit. Alan's such a great guy, and of course he's gone through his own struggles and came through it. A strong man, a man of very strong opinion. But they toured with us. They had a big hit in the States. It had gone gold in the States and was just killing it in Canada, and went out and opened for us, and it was such a fun tour. And that's when we became buddies. And so I talked to Alan quite a bit, not as much as I should, but every few months. And so it's always great to catch up with him and Sam and the rest of the guys. And so it's fun that they're going to be there as well.
We were having some fun earlier today. We opened the show talking about the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock and speculating that if we had to narrow it down to 4, that your name would be in the mix to be on the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock musicians. So I want to put you in a tough position, and you may have to vote for yourself, Tom. This may come, but if you were to name the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock musicians, we're talking history, whose 4 busts would be carved into I mean, the eastern slopes of the Rockies are kind of up for grabs right now. So if no coal mining, we'll go with the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rockers. Who's your top 4?
Well, that's pretty easy. I mean, that's like, Gordy Lightfoot would be up there. I'd have to put Lightfoot, Neil, Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen. That's a stretch because a lot of people don't consider him rock, but his stuff's been interpreted that way. And I've got to. It's funny. I got to say something that's maybe a bit controversial, but probably not. But when I started out, the hip were kids, right? And it's hard sometimes to respect kids that are starting out. They're getting all this attention and that. But there was pretty relevant reasons for it when you look at the body of work and Ahead by a Century and that. So I'd like to put the whole bunch of those guys up there. But I'll say Gord Downie should go up there. And boy, I tell you, the band again too. So I put Robbie up there. Robbie Robertson. He inducted me, did a nice little speech when I got the Hall of Fame, and that was nice. And he's a huge hero of mine. When I started out, we used to dress like the band, walk like the band at high school, do all their songs, and got very few jobs. Got very few gigs because people wanted to hear Led Zeppelin, and we were playing band songs and Birds and stuff. So
okay, well, we'll give you a pass. You've named 5. You got the 2 Gordies, and Neil and Joni. Although a lot of people have suggested that Joni Mitchell might belong on like a separate list where we could do like folk roots kind of a thing.
So with Leonard, right? Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Leonard Cohen and Joni, let's face it, they probably have, along with Neil, I mean, they have such a far-reaching level of influence in so many genres of music. Like Joni really touches on jazz, and you're right. I mean, probably Blue is one of the greatest records of all time in that folk music genre. And Leonard, of course, what can you say about Leonard? I mean, Leonard influenced Joni as well. So, I think the important thing though, Ryan, is that we do have a rich history and that influences the whole world. And, some people want to put Adams up there too. And I have a bit of a sordid history with Brian, but no, not really. People like to make a big deal out of that. But, Brian has done a lot for Canadian identity internationally for sure, with his incredible body of work.
I think Brian Adams should quit. A lot of great music. I think he should quit Twitter. Whenever I see him tweet, I go, not a good look. Not a good look.
Brian, he seems to be able, for a guy that should be a good diplomat, because he's had so much success, he tends to put his foot in his mouth. I always kind of, my whole thing, especially if I've had 2 glasses of red or whatever, I always say, okay, let's put this away till the morning. Do not tweet that yet.
How do you not have a line of wine yet, Red Ryder? The commercial element to this is just waiting for you.
Yeah, I was talking to, I've talked about it with a couple of people, but we just haven't pulled the trigger. And that is my chosen drink. I like to pretend that it's really good for me, even at 3 or 4 glasses. But I mean, we've talked about it. I was talking to it about it with Jillian, who lives with Patrick Downey, and they've got a line of wine out, as well as beer, which you can only buy here. The Tragically Hip beer. It's very cool.
I just got my hands on a 4-pack of it. Yeah, I had to work a trade out, but I got my now I'm deciding who gets to drink it.
Jake Gold's gonna love me because I'm promoting their beer.
Yeah, that's right. I will mention in the context of the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rockers, our guest here live on Real Talk, Tom Cochrane, remains one of only 3 male Canadian singer-songwriters to have a diamond certified album in Canada that's over 1 million copies sold. Mad World is now, it's estimated sold around, at last count, 1.7 million copies in Canada, at least 3 million copies worldwide.
Look at that hair, man.
That hair is spectacular. I
gotta get the blow dryer out.
Oh man, that's the kind of hair. No offense, man, but guys with thinning hair hate you just based on that photo. Tom,
mine's not thinning yet. I just took a shower.
We could tell you've still got the lettuce, my man. How the music industry's changed a whole lot, obviously over 40 years with regards to how record deals are structured, the importance of tours, how bands are gleaning revenue right now, live streaming, that kind of a thing, and then the pandemic interruption. My buddy JJ Shipley getting ready to release his album right as the pandemic hits, and it's had a devastating impact on so many musicians. How have you managed kind of the evolution and some of those challenges and changes in the industry?
that's clever, because you're kind of avoiding the elephant in the room, which a lot of people in the West do, because I think Westerners have that attitude that, look, okay, it's a virus, we're dealing with it, but let's live, and we'll do the necessary things. But so I just want to touch on that for a second before we touch on the bigger part of that question, dealing with a lot of those changes. Well, I'll tackle that first. So Alex Lifeson and I, we spend a lot of time together as well. We go on a couple golf vacations together and that. And, love the guy dearly, one of the greats. And by the way, there's another one. Can we backtrack, because Rush should be up there? And again, I can't say one of them without saying the three of them. I should have said Rush. I don't know. Why didn't I do that?
Well,
Alex,
because it's too tough of a call. Right? People want Neil Peart. They want Geddy Lee. We were having this conversation earlier.
Okay. So, yeah, what was I thinking? They should be up there as well. So, anyways, this is a tough question, because a couple of times out here, I've gotten into elevators, and then, and the elevator's fairly crowded, and I'm talking about Saskatoon and Regina, and we got stuff in the elevator. So it's crowded anyways, and then the door will open and people don't have masks on and stuff. And I respect people's opinions about masks and the anti-maskers and that, although I think they're wrong. And I got some dear friends, as I'm sure you do, Ryan, that don't believe in them. Oh no, they don't work. They're like, it's like putting up a chain link fence and thinking you're going to keep mosquitoes out. Well, it's not true. I mean, doctors have been wearing them for years in operation, so there's a reason they work. There's no doubt of it, especially the KN95 ones. But a lot of people out here have jettisoned that, and okay, I respect that. That's good. But I suppose, because you've got the experts here saying, okay, we're at a position now where we can move into another phase. But I have very strong feelings about the vaccine. Do I think people should be mandated to take the vaccine? No, I don't. I think still should be personal choice, but I very strongly believe in them. So I have a right to endorse it. And when I do, there's a bit of a firestorm. But that's my opinion. I think vaccines work. I think I think it may be too late because of this Delta thing that's coming along and other variants to achieve herd immunity, but they work. I mean, obviously, there's 97% of the people in hospitals in the States that aren't vaccinated. So come on, they just work. And we know masks work as well. So the vast majority of experts think they work. I can't control 100% what people are going to do, nor do I want to. We believe in freedom, and we believe in freedom of choice. But with my guys, we've all agreed, and the band feels comfortable. We're coming from the East. We're traveling. We're in airports. We're in areas of exposure, and that I just want my fans to know, and people that are coming to the show, that we as a band have a special obligation to try to keep our fans and the people that come in contact with us, because we're traveling, safe. So we kind of mandate the mask for us and for our crew, and for the people that are around us, like kind of working with us, that are helping us with equipment and catering and all that. So we're very conscious of that, and we are all vaccinated and that. So we're very conscious of that. And I want our fans to know that it's not a matter of us. And like I said, getting back to the elevator will open, and there'll be a family there, and none of them have masks on, and they want to get in the elevator. I said, hey, you guys, would you mind taking another elevator? And they look at you like you're a snob, like you're dissing them. And we're not. It's more for their protection than for mine, because, I don't want to expose anybody unnecessarily. So we're very cautious about that stuff. So I want people to know that. I get it. Everybody's tired of this. We want to get on and live as much as we can and talk about COVID as little as we can. And I'm on that bandwagon, believe me. But just so people know that we're handling it our ways to make sure people are safe that we come in contact with. Now, with that said, because people can be carriers. Now, we know that people can be vaccinated, not show symptoms, be carriers and be spreaders. So we got to be careful for our fans. Beyond that, like Alex Lifeson, so we spent a lot of time together. And Alex said to me one day, he said, Tom, we lived through the golden years. We're really lucky. We lived through that period when recording and releasing music was seminal to our careers and to impacting people, to being able to tour, which incidentally, we're not painters, we're performing artists. So the whole interaction and the whole symbiotic nature of performing and writing is all tied in. So I haven't been quite as productive. I've been productive, but I haven't been quite as productive as I wanted to be over this COVID period, because I really get inspiration from performing, and it's important, and it kind of feeds back into my writing process. But I think with that said, I feel so bad, as you were saying, for the young artists that we're trying to release stuff, that we're trying to get careers on the go, that we're trying to get off the ground, because it's really tough for them to begin with. They don't have a model. Now, of course, the model was a bit corrupt in the day, the whole recording industry thing. They would select one band or one artist, and whatever, they throw mud against the wall, and whatever stuck a little bit, that's what they work on, and they push everything aside, and a lot of good music got missed, right? We all know that, but at least there was a model. There was something tangible to work with, and an organization that was helping you with promotion people and getting on the road and tour support and getting out there and visiting stations and talking to people and that. And now artists are left to their own devices. A few years ago with Kevin Drew from Broken Social Scene, he goes, "Wow, you got guys that actually come out here and plug your stuff in?" I mean, a lot of these kids are doing everything on their own. Though, yes, because of social media, they can book their own gigs, and we couldn't do a lot of that. They can book a lot of their gigs in Europe and all that, and bands are doing that. But guess what they do? They go over there and they network, and they sleep on people's couches. They sleep on people's floors. There's not the tour support where they can stay in hotels and all that stuff. So it's tough already, and then COVID is just really decimated it. And so, Ryan, I think you're the kind of guy that is trying to support your artists, that young artists that in Alberta and that are putting records out, and that's all you can do, because there is no model. Again, they have to do all their work on social media, networking on social media, getting their work out, trying to get their work streamed, which still is a pittance, but although a lot of the streaming people like Spotify are doing a better job at getting residuals to artists, but it's tough, man. It is really tough. And Al and I, we're in a different kind of sphere. We understand it, but people really want to. It's not critical for me to get new music out there to know where Tom Cochrane's at. I'm very proud of the last record, but let's face it, it's not like if people don't hear those songs when we play on Saturday night, they're going to be a vast number of them are going to be terribly disappointed. Even though I love Pink Time, and I'll kind of get that into the mix from time to time, and the ones that I've known with the Terry Fox verse, of course, try to get those songs in. But I get it. People really want to hear Bad Man World. They want to hear those songs, Neruda. They want to hear Victory Day. They want to hear Big League, and we all have so much time. I mean, we could play for 3 hours, and we have done that over the last few years, some of those shows. And but it's
Tom, when that happens, like, when that happens, let's say an audience is just with you and something's happening, there's something special, and you're picking up on it. Are you the type of front man? Are you the type of performer that will say, listen, we were going to play for an hour and a half, we're going to play for 2.5? I've heard that Springsteen does this sometimes, that it's not always expected. Are you the same way?
Yes, to a certain degree, but not with as broad a brush as Springsteen. I mean, he's the man, and we did show with him back in Moncton, and I remember they asked me on stage for the encore. Of course, that was a huge honor. He's got this little porthole on stage that he's such a music fan, and he knows his stuff so much, and he's so excited, like he's just like a big kid. And apparently he's going, "Come on, you guys," to his band. This is the guy that wrote Lunatic Fringe. We got to come check this out. And he's got this little porthole that he peeks out from to check out the audience before he goes on, if he's got opening or whatever. And he played. How can you take a three chord song, which again is a big honor, because one of the first songs he ever learned was Twist and Shout. And the Isley Brothers Twist Show, of course, the Beatles made it famous. And we did I think a 17-minute version of Twist and Shout. He just wouldn't stop. And it was in the crowd was building. Like, you couldn't think the crowd could get any more jacked up than they were, but the energy was just phenomenal. And he wouldn't go off, you know. It was a James Brown routine that he would pull. And I was honored because the road manager told me to go and, you know, at this point in the song, once you get to this particular verse, go on the mic, sing one with him, or sing one on your own, and we're singing on a mic together and that. And we got off stage, he's soaked. And it's cold. There's a bit of a wind blowing back. You can get in the Maritimes in the evening. And he's just laughing like Santa Claus. And he's hugging me. And he's just, that was great, man. Wow. And he's like a 15-year-old playing in a garage. Like he captures that same energy that we all like to capture because of being 15-year-olds playing to our friends in a garage when you start out. Because that's what rock and roll is all about, is the essence of that. And you feel timeless when you're up there. And I just said, Bruce, you better get to your dressing room because you're going to catch pneumonia. And he pats me on the shoulder. He goes, thanks, man. Like, he was surprised, like I was being considerate, but he's just such a gentleman, and just said, like, he would have stood there and talked to me for hours, you know, and went back and said a quick hello in his dressing room to everybody. I know Nils Lofgren, incredible musician in his own right. He actually, people don't know Nils in the band. He's the other guitar player with Van Zandt, and he actually played piano on After the Gold Rush on Neil Young's album. So he's a bit like Al Cooper. He kind of wandered in. I can play piano. He played piano on that record, but Nils is a great musician too. Wonderful musicians in that band, and done stuff with Jake, with Clarence's kid, and again, great musician in that. So now I put, you know, and it's funny you brought up the Mount Rushmore, because I've often used that analogy, and I say if there was a Mount Rushmore rock, Springsteen he'd be the most prominent one for me. You know, he kind of brings together James Brown and Bob Dylan in one package, you know.
The Mount Rushmore, I mean, we gave you the Mount Rushmore of Canadian rock. The Mount Rushmore of rock is, I don't even know.
And you still got Neil up there as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah?
But,
so you got Neil Young, Bruce Springsteen. Does Mick Jagger go on? Does Elvis doesn't count? Does Elvis count?
But how do you put Mick up there and not Keith?
And not Keith? And like, is Elvis on there?
Yeah, I'd say if it's rock, Elvis. I mean, you know, you got
probably,
and then you got to have the Beatles up there, right?
Yeah. And
then you got to have, although a lot of people trying to roll their eyes, they're not rock, Tom. Come on, bet they were rock. We're gonna have to get the Rushmore's got to add 8 more presidents so that we can just expand these conversations. Buddy Holly's got to be up there, right?
Sure.
Little Richard.
Tom, you talk about how you felt like you could talk to Bruce Springsteen for hours. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I know our audience is along for this. I want to just thank you for your time and your availability. I do want to ask you about one thing in closing. We'll remind people that you're going to be playing here in Alberta's capital city along with Glass Tiger at Rockfest. That's coming up in a couple of days, August 14th at Edmonton Exhibition Lands. You can learn more at tomcochranemusic.com. I didn't know this, that when you were a kid that you had aspirations, or at least you were interested in the idea of becoming a journalist. And we've been having some really interesting conversations just even yesterday about conflicts of interest and bias and the public trust in journalism, or the difference between a reporter, you know, a journalist, so to speak, and an opinion columnist, or someone like me, a pundit, you know, that'll provide opinion-based commentary. Are you still fascinated by the profession? I mean, you yourself are a professional storyteller, of course, in one vein. Your assessment of journalism today and the relationship with the public, I'd be curious to pick your brain.
Yeah, I take this very seriously, and therefore it's an important subject for me. I really looked up at people like Edward R. Murrow and Peter Jennings, later, great Canadian journalist, and a lot of the journalists, Dan Rathers, and people that went into really tough places, which I've done with NGOs, but these guys have been on the front lines of, you know, the embedded stuff, as we learned to know it later. Very, very important work. I've said before all this fake news stuff started to become prominent that I don't care. Like the fundamental pillar of democracy is journalism. And I really believe in my heart that there are dedicated people that like Woodward and Bernstein and a lot of these people. Canada has a rich history of wonderful correspondents that put themselves on the line all the time to try to get people the truth. And I don't care if I take flack on it. You know, the Washington Post is an important newspaper, and so is the New York Times, the Globe. Canada has a tremendously rich history of it, and it's important that people have that trust. The whole social media thing and people being able to blog ad hoc and all these nonsensical, all this stuff that people are putting out there that people take in and turn into conspiracy theories. I'll tell you, there's one big conspiracy theory. There's a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of countries out there that want this. They want to promote this because they want to undermine democracy. So we've got to start to pull together a little bit more as people, to understand each other, to talk to each other with polite discourse. My dad always said to me, Tom, and I think this is a kind of a cool Canadian trait, that, you know, you may not agree with the other guy, but listen to him. Give him his 5 minutes, listen to him, and give him that respect of listening to his opinion. And we're not doing that now, you know, especially in the States. They just draw the line and everything's politicized. But I do believe that great journalism, and I think there's dedicated people out there that want to bring people the truth. And if it's not the truth you want to hear, then the right wing says, oh, it's left-wing propaganda. And, you know, we got to kind of take a deep breath and realize we're at a really dangerous point in history where democracy could fall by the wayside very easily, Ryan. And so voices like yourself are very important. It's important that you've got a venue for it. You've got a voice, and you're allowing people to come on and have their opinion. And so it's important to do this, and it's important to have this kind of discourse. In order for us to survive as a democracy. And that's really important to me. Freedom is really important. You know, I always dedicate Lunatic Fringe to the spirit of freedom. There's some misinformation right there that you know, talk about fake news has been happening for a long time. You know, the whole revisionist historian people with the Holocaust. It's disgraceful. I mean, the evidence is there, and people that want to deny evidence and lean towards you know, conspiracy theories and all that stuff. I mean, you know, these are dangerous times, and we've got to let the other guy have his opinion. We got to listen to each other, and we've got to try to kind of take a deep breath and not let anger take control. Right?
Love it. Wise words from a wise man, one of Canada's all-time greats. Tom Cochrane will be in Edmonton at the Edmonton Exhibition Lands coming up Saturday, August 14th, along with Glass Tiger at Rockfest. You can learn more at tomcochranemusic.com. It's been a huge pleasure on behalf of our audience that's been taking this in live, Tom, and the thousands that will download this and listen to this later. Thanks so much for your time.
You know what? Best interview I've done in a couple of years. That includes prior to COVID. Really enjoyed that. Thanks, Ryan.
That means a lot to me. Thanks. Tom Cochrane, one of the all-time greats, an officer of the Order of Canada, and for good reason. Didn't even mention, by the way, you should mention also a former honorary Air Force colonel in the 409 Squadron. He's got an honorary doctorate, right? A Diamond Jubilee Award. I mean, ton of songwriter. He's got the thing where if you're going to, a guy like this, you know, Sam behind the scenes doing a great job on the technical. So if I'm introducing him, if you bring Tom Cochrane up into the frame as I'm reading the intro, you got to cut it by like 80%. Because if you're going to just keep reading down the list, tick, 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 he's going to get uncomfortable. I really appreciate his assessment. I didn't think I was going to get into talking about masks and vaccines with Tom Cochrane. We did spare him on purpose. The question around the federal election, we've just realized here now live as we've been on that the Prime Minister plans to visit Rideau Hall on Sunday, this coming Sunday, which means... Sunday means that my buddy was off by a week on his prediction. Convinced it was going to be August 8th, but it'll be the 15th. The Prime Minister will ask that Parliament be dissolved, triggering an election. The campaign expected to run for 36 days, which means that Canadians can expect a federal election on September 20th. I'm still of the thought, I like that unless people volunteer that information, quite frankly, I like keeping that a mystery with people, how people are going to vote. And I also think it's kind of unfair to ask people how they're going to vote or their thoughts on an election. But I suspect actually Tom, our buddy Tom, might not have had a problem with it because he took that COVID question head on. He goes, let me tell you why this is our policy. Let me tell you why. There's going to be a story from someone probably that says, I ran into Tom Cochrane in an elevator, and not only would he not sign an autograph, he asked me to take a different elevator. I've always wondered what it's like to be, your guy like Tom Cochrane or Wayne Gretzky or these other people that he mentions, Peter Jennings, may he rest in peace. And, you can't, like, you're walking down any street in Canada, people are going to know who you are. Like, if you're Tom Cochrane, everywhere you go to Friesen Brothers grocery store, you're in the bakery, they know that that's Tom Cochrane in the freaking bakery. And every interaction that somebody has with you is their interaction with Tom Cochrane. So there comes to be a lot of responsibility with that. So he knows exactly when he starts talking about vaccines and the science behind masks and all that kind of stuff, he knows what he's doing, right? And you wonder, like, if someone's mind right now that's going to hear this interview on Real Talk, I bet you Tom Cochrane is going to influence some people to go get vaccinated. I bet you that that's the case. I mean, he's a guy that we were reading comments. I mean, we could have sat here and read comments from Real Talkers for the entire interview. Like Hope Springs right now, one of my favorite handles of any of our audience members, says, you have such an important voice, Mr. Cochrane. Many people listen to you. Says, now I wonder if some may try to cancel him because he's so honest. Tom Cochrane doesn't give a flying fuck if you try to cancel him for him being honest.
You
can't cancel Tom Cochrane. That's what I would love to be at a point. I mean, maybe we are here in our own small, tiny little microcosm. I'm not drawing any comparisons, obviously. But I'm just saying, when you get to a point where you're like, I'm going to say what I think, whether you like it or not, this is my truth, and I'm going to share it. That is a powerful place to be. Mm-hmm. Can we change tune and do something fun here every Thursday? We have a tradition here on the show every single Thursday. And, of course, you know that this is courtesy of our friends at Prairie Catering. We take a look at the headlines. We keep our eye on news events happening around the globe. And every single Thursday, we give someone an opportunity to eat your words. Presented by Prairie Catering. And in today's story, we head down to the United States of America. This is actually kind of a feel-good story, as a matter of fact. This is cool. We want to take you to the beautiful Union Bluff in York, Maine. I mean, this is a destination restaurant, as you can see. Just an absolutely beautiful facility. And they've had their struggles through COVID just like anybody else. But there was a server there at Union Bluff that was having a bit of a tough go. The staff encountered a customer that, walked in and allegedly cursed at the employees. They weren't getting the service they thought they deserved. It wasn't happening fast enough. And so they blew a gasket, so to speak. Well, cut to a few days later. And this letter arrives at Union Bluff, the Union Bluff Hotel. Hi, can you please give this $100 bill along with my apology to the girl who was the hostess, taking names to be seated for dinner on Monday, July 5th at around 5 p.m. I was very rude to her, which is out of character for me. I have way more respect for people than I showed that day. Pre-dinner cocktails may have contributed, but are no excuse. When our large party was having difficulty being seated, the wait was longer than I thought. I said loudly, "This is bullshit," and I left. And I feel bad. This is coming from a guy who tells people to be kind to service staff and to tip big. How hypocritical of me. I will apologize to her the next time I am in York, Maine. I've been going to York every year for the 4th of July with my family for over 25 years. You never want to be that guy, and that day I was that guy. And I'm sincerely sorry. Signed off, an embarrassed customer. Hey, as far as I'm concerned, that is a stand-up thing to do. In the moment, we've all had our unfortunate circumstances roll out. I know better than anybody. But when you circle back and make things right, every once in a while, you deserve a stick tap, as they say, when you step up and eat your words. Presented by Prairie Catering. A shout out to the anonymous customer who made things right. A reminder that Prairie Catering offers corporate catering for office meetings, in person or virtual. They deliver, of course. You can host business meetings and conferences at the beautiful Art Gallery of Alberta, from executive boardrooms to their state-of-the-art theater. They can host up to 300 people safely, and you'll get 20% off any rental space at the Art Gallery of Alberta for your next corporate function if you mention Eat Your Words on Real Talk, valid only for 2021 rental dates. I wanted to find a positive story for Eat Your Words this week, because there were a whole lot of examples that we could have used where we would just pile on people and tell them to eat their words, but I liked that one. Somebody who in retrospect went back and said I was a hypocrite. The way that I talk about how you should treat service staff, the way that I talk about how you should tip, especially coming out of a pandemic, and I am sincerely sorry. And not sincerely sorry if I offended anybody. Sincerely sorry.
It's not, they didn't write, we missed the mark. I missed the mark.
Many people feel that we missed the mark. And in case we offended anybody, we are sincerely sorry.
No, that letter was a real apology.
That was a real apology.
No excuses. Just, hey, I messed up. I'm sorry.
Terry says, good for him. Scott says, I don't eat my words, I eat my feelings. You and me both, buddy. Now, I've just looked at the time. This show has started kind of funny. We had some kind of stuff going on behind the scenes that hopefully nobody really noticed. This team, I'm so proud of how this team operates in the face of adversity and challenge. It gave us so much fun to screw around and have a bunch of fun and talk about silly things. And then back to back, fantastic guests. This is the type of show, if you enjoyed what you heard, if you enjoyed what you saw, we'd love for you to share it. We'd love for you to smash the like button, to subscribe to us, and to keep the buzz going as we continue to grow Real Talk. We'll wrap with a reminder that these shows don't happen without the support of our amazing sponsors. Please support them whenever you can. That includes the team at Park Power at parkpower.ca. They've been giving us these notes on frugality, which is a great reminder that sometimes having these fixed rates can really benefit you in high power usage type scenarios, heat waves, air conditioning units. You know what I'm talking about. Expensive power bills present a great opportunity to take a look at how you're structured with your service provider. Protect yourself from price volatility by switching to a fixed rate offering. Park Power with flexible fixed rates on 1 and 3 year terms. You're never locked in, though. You can cancel anytime. 2021-Real Talk is the promo code that gets you 70% off your first bill. A shout out to the team at Westworld Computers for powering this studio and powering this show. We use virtually everything in the lineup, from the iPhone to the iMac to the iPad to the MacBook Pro. I'm just missing the Apple Watch, but that's okay because I don't have to stare at the step counter all the time. I feel like I'm left off the hook there. No matter what you're looking for, they've got it for you, including service techs that have seen it all over the 40 years they've been in operation. Westworld.ca. The team at Kubi Energy will present Positive Reflections. The first Monday, we're back after our week off next week. You can submit your good news stories, your random acts of kindness to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Kubi Energy right now with details available for agricultural producers in the province of Alberta. There's a new benefit that could help you go sustainable, even net zero. For some of your operations, visit kubienergy.ca for more on that. And finally, a big shout out to our friends at Eden Landscaping. We're getting into the dog days of summer. We're on the back nine, as we all know. I mean, I hate to point it out, but it's true. It means that through the winter months, their team is going to be preparing to design and really map out how people's dreams will become reality when it comes to their outdoor spaces. It's a year-round endeavor. That's how the customer relationship works with the team that takes it from concept all the way through to completion. You can find Eden Landscaping at landscapeedmonton.ca. Coming up tomorrow, I can't even believe it's Friday already, but we've got a whole lot on the go. There are many stories that our team is keeping an eye on we've not yet talked about. We'll wrap up the week with a bow with the Real Talk Roundtable you won't want to miss, plus more details on things happening across Canada, analysis of that federal election call, and more. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning. In the meantime, make it a great Thursday.
The